Lord of the Mysteries Chapter 1081. With Patrick Bryan's chanting, the bones around the black casket were gradually stained with a dark green layer. They blended with the white, bringing out an extremely scary sensation. As the spirit dance became more and more intense, as though the voices from the underworld were constantly reverberating, the bones floated up one by one, as though they possessed lives of their own. Then, they were cast towards the heavy and pitch-black casket in what could be described as orderly chaos. They passed through the lid and entered as though they were incorporeal. The casket immediately transformed into a deep whirlpool that seemed like it couldn't be filled. It expanded on the spot, emitting a cold aura that was high and mighty. This made Patrick Bryan instinctively tremble and lower his head. This was an angel, the aura of a death consul. At that moment, the believers of death, the ones who were dancing spirit dance, all collapsed to the ground with their bodies left convulsing. Their consciousness became muddled as though they were touring the underworld. And above the grey fog, with the help of his marionette's prayer points of light, the fool Klein secretly heaved a sigh of relief because the leader of the Numinous Episcopate's artificial death faction, the angel who was sleeping in the mausoleum, the high priest hater's test didn't exceed his expectations. Using the enslavement and control higher sequence beyond us of the death pathway had on lower sequence beyond us, he could directly obtain information from Patrick Bryan. From a certain point of view, this was an interrogation at the psyche level, something that Klein was rather proficient at dealing with. Nas. He immediately let the red priest card fly into his hand and enter his body. All of a sudden, Klein had a dark red robe draped over him. This appearance seemed to look like rust and settled gunpowder. As for his face, it was covered by a dark gold mask. The patterns on it were ancient and set off a contrasting appearance with the crown he wore that was embedded with gems that sparkled red, blue, and green. Following that, he mobilized all the powers of the mysterious space above the grey fog that he could, turning them into invisible torrents that surrounded the paper figurines he had prepared in advance. Through the prayer lights, it shot towards undying Patrick Bryan. At this moment, Patrick's body trembled slightly due to the feeling of submission he felt towards his teacher's aura, as though he could see layers of holy wings. Klein had hidden the exact appearance of the flaming angel, allowing a portion of it to be revealed. This also meant that he had interfered with the special effects. One holy wing after another enveloped Patrick before vanishing, causing him to hallucinate in confusion. As a sequence for demigod, he quickly came to his senses. He realized that he no longer yearned to submit and not be able to disobey his teacher's orders. His consciousness seemed to have been pulled out of his body as he stared calmly at everything above the mind world. At the same time, as a zealot, Patrick Bryan didn't hesitate to view Angel's embrace as a gift from death. There was no doubt about it. At that moment, in the deep vortex formed from the black casket, an old and cold voice sounded out, one that could rip out a person's soul from their bodies. Not bad. Any progress in awakening God recently? Patrick Bryan followed the instructions given by the blessed, and he described his efforts and intentions in a half-truthful manner. After a series of questions and answers, the death domain angel on the other side of the vortex, hater, didn't suspect anything. He calmly said, "Very good. Continue doing it. I will support you." He paused for a moment and nonchalantly said, "I'll send you an assistant first. A Sequence 5 gatekeeper to help you in completing the corresponding tasks to relieve your stress." Is this what His Excellency mentioned about not being at ease with me? Teacher is indeed unwilling to see me gain the favor of God and threaten his position. Having been slowly influenced by Klein through his daily communications with him, Patrick Bryan, who had slowly changed his mindset, had no way of rejecting such kind intentions. He could only answer politely, "Yes, teacher." Just as he said that, the pitch-black vortex suddenly opened up. It transformed into a mysterious pattern, conjuring up a pair of indescribable double bronze doors. With a creaking sound, the door opened and a crack widened. There was still darkness behind the rift, and there seemed to be eyes hidden in the depths of the darkness, quietly watching me outside. At that moment, a palm stretched out and rested on the door crack. Its skin was rather pale, allowing one to see the blue blood veins underneath. With a tug, a figure leaped out of the door. This was a young, tall man wearing a black robe with red linings with his hood pulled up. His facial features were gentle, and his skin was slightly brown. It was obvious at a glance that he was from a southern continent bloodline. He was rather handsome, but he looked anemic. Stepping on the solid ground beneath his feet, the young man didn't even glance at Patrick Bryan. He raised his head and looked into the sky. The corners of his mouth curled up as he narrowed his eyes and sighed. This intoxicating atmosphere. As a beyonder of the death pathway, to be ignored by someone whose sequence was lower than his, there was no doubt that Patrick Bryan was a little angry, but in front of his teacher, he had no choice but to follow the flow and end the ritual. During this process, the fool's response above the grey fog was even more intense than Patrick's. Because through the grey fog's true vision, he could see the abnormality of the new gatekeeper. The gatekeeper's internal underworld expanded in an odd manner, covering every part of his body. And there was only one soul in the underworld, a young and handsome soul with red hair, signs of rotting on its face, and a flag mark on its glabella. It wore black blood-stained armor. Explore up-to-date stories at no/vel/bin.com. Klein wasn't unfamiliar with this soul, for he immediately recognized it. The Red Angel evil spirit, Sauron Einhorn Medici. This fellow has returned to Backlund again, and had a certain working relationship with the Angel of the Numinous Episcopate's artificial death faction. Klein instinctively took out the Red Priest card and accommodated the Tyrant card before summoning the Sea God Scepter. He planned on giving the Red Angel evil spirit a zap of lightning storm, but as his thoughts raced, he restrained this impulse and gave up on the corresponding thoughts. This would expose Patrick Bryan's problem and let the angel from the death domain guess that something had happened to artificial death. This wasn't beneficial to the Evernight goddess's control and digestion of the death pathway's uniqueness. Amidst his thoughts, he quickly left the world above the grey fog and returned to the real world. He made his marionette secretly leave the clothing factory and teleport away with his body. He had originally planned on creating a shocking experience for Patrick Bryan after the ritual. He had even made some preparations beforehand. Now, he could only give up to prevent the Red Angel evil spirit from discovering him. Inside the clothing factory, the young gatekeeper, who had been possessed by Sauron Einhorn Medici, pulled his head even lower before turning his head slightly and looking in a particular direction outside. That was the spot where Klein's marionette, Konas Kilger, had been hiding, nearly a kilometer away from the factory. After staring at it for a few seconds, the young gatekeeper revealed an obvious smile. Just as Patrick Bryan was about to say something, planning to use his identity of the person in charge of the Numinous Episcopate's artificial death faction to haze the envoy of his teacher, his spiritual perception was triggered. He turned around in a bizarre manner, casting his gaze on another building in the factory. On the second floor of the building, behind a glass window in a room, there was a pair of emotionless black eyes staring at them. Patrick Bryan's eyelids twitched, and his body suddenly vanished. Woo! A cold wind blew, causing the glass window to rot silently. Without any movement, it crumbled into countless snowflakes. In the corresponding room, a skinny Patrick in a black robe and a thin face emerged. He saw that the master of that pair of cold, black eyes was a rough mud doll. Who made the doll? Who moved it here? Patrick Bryan looked around cautiously, not missing any corners. Just as he turned his gaze towards the corridor and faced the glass window with his body slanted, the crude, black eyes of the mud doll suddenly turned. Then, it raised its hands and grabbed Patrick's neck. Halfway through the action, the mud doll seemed to lose its support and lost all mobility. Many cracks appeared on its surface as it instantly shattered into pieces. Patrick Bryan's figure disappeared first before he appeared in the corridor, staring at the collapsed doll as if he was facing a most powerful enemy. At that moment, he had really jumped in fright. Although there were all sorts of bizarre and harrowing matters related to spirits, it was still quite scary for a puppet to suddenly come alive without the influence of an external spirit body. The mud doll lay there quietly in fragments without so much as a stir. Patrick Bryan waited patiently for a while before finally confirming that there were no more abnormalities. He shuttled through the spirit world once again and returned to the place where the ritual had been held. At that moment, the heavy, pitch-black casket had completely decayed. It was as if it had been buried in the ground for centuries, if not millennia. And the surrounding underworld believers were slowly recovering from their semi-conscious state. Patrick Bryan looked around but could not find the young gatekeeper sent by his teacher. He didn't know when he had left. Isn't he here to spy on me? The demigod of the death pathway was at a loss. Taking into consideration the abnormal discovery he had made, the living mud doll, Patrick Bryan didn't delay any further. He quickly snapped his followers awake and cleaned up the scene and removed all traces. After he was done, he suddenly heard a voice. "Is this clothing factory yours?" Patrick Bryan's figure instantly disappeared and appeared again, now facing the person who spoke. That was the young gatekeeper who had gone somewhere. No. Patrick frowned slightly. How could he do such a thing in his own factory? If he was exposed, wouldn't there be no way out? Not too stupid. The young gatekeeper nodded gently. Patrick narrowed his eyes and suppressed his anger. "Where did you go?" The young gatekeeper chuckled and said, "I visited some familiar spots and met a friend." Lord of the Mysteries, Chapter 1082. Chapter 1082, Sudden Turn of Events. 160 Beauclun Street, inside Dwayne Dantes' mansion. After teleporting back, Klein didn't delay at all. He immediately set up an altar and held a ritual to pray to death. "You are the essence of death. You are the Lord of the dead. You are the final home to all living beings. I pray for your help. I pray that you will know how to resolve the problem of the Red Angel evil spirit. He has possessed the body of a gatekeeper and is cooperating with the numinous episcopate's high priest, Hater. He has come to Backland and been made an assistant to Patrick Bryan. With regard to this matter, there was really no choice but to seek help from the Ebonite goddess. Ignoring the possibility of seeking out the ascetic leader, Oriana, in a cooperation effort, or whether he had the ability to get finish off Sauron Einhorn Medici, even if he could, once the Red Angel evil spirit disappeared, the numinous episcopate's artificial death faction's high priest would immediately understand that something major had happened here. He could then connect it to other abnormalities and determined that there was something wrong with artificial death's condition. Then, using his own level and status, possible sealed artifacts, and his familiarity with the pathway, he might be able to create mutually harmful acts of destruction. And if he ignored the Red Angel, this evil spirit who was a conspirer wouldn't take long to detect something abnormal with Patrick Bryan. With his knowledge and intelligence, it wasn't difficult to guess the nature of the problem. No matter how I deal with it, it'll be a problem. As expected of an angel in the war domain. Even if he is a 3-in-1 spirit body, he can still create unresolvable problems for others. This must have actually been an idea that he gave Hater. Actually, I do have an extreme idea, that is to let the Red Angel evil spirit be killed by other churches, official organizations, or secret organizations for another whole different matter. In short, anything related to the goddess cannot come center stage. Things must be made very clear. The difficulty with this approach is how to let an extremely experienced, high-ranking member of the conspiring domain fall into a trap. If I don't handle it well, it might backfire on me. After the prayer ended, Klein casually let his thoughts wander as he waited patiently for the Ebonite goddess to give him a response. After more than 10 seconds, the herbal dregs that pleased the deity were swept up by an invisible wind. They flew out and landed on the table, forming words. His coming spells the raising of arms. What does that mean? Looking at the sentence that gave him a sense of déjà vu, he frowned slightly. As a seer, he habitually interpreted it. Due to the king's problem, Lun has fallen into the shadows of war. Hence, the Red Angel that symbolizes war came. This means that it might no longer be possible to stop the war. Upon reaching sequence 1, one would become a symbol of certain phenomena. As these thoughts flashed through Klein's mind, the invisible wind came to a stop. The altar, which was completely isolated by the wall of spirituality, turned extremely silent. There are no other revelations? After waiting for a while, Klein confirmed that this was all, so he ended the ritual and cleared the altar. He then walked to the sofa in the room and sat down to see if anything else would happen. After a full 15 minutes, he didn't usher in the arrival of the matron of the Evernite cloister, the leader of the 13 archbishops, angel of concealment, Oriana. I don't have to deal with the red angel evil spirit, and I should just leave him be. Or, there's another solution, but my involvement isn't needed. In essence, he wasn't a devout believer of Evernite. Since the goddess said that he didn't need to bother about it, he naturally couldn't be bothered to do so. After all, this matter was not only extremely troublesome for him, but it was also extremely dangerous. Shaking his head, Klein took out a pen and paper from his pocket and began a dream divination. What had happened tonight made him feel that he couldn't waste any time. He had to digest the Bizarro Sorcerer potion as soon as possible. Above the fog sea, inside a steam-powered merchant ship that was extremely close to a pirate ship. One by one, the men and older women were tied up and pushed to the edge of the deck. Then, the pirates either used their hands or legs to throw them into the sea. The splashing sounds didn't affect the pirates at all, guffawing over this bloodless massacre. After clearing the captives, they carried their guns and lanterns to the shipboard, preparing to enjoy the pitiful bugs struggling. However, under the light, the dark blue sea beside the boat quietly undulated. No one was there. They sank so quickly, a pirate blurted out in surprise. The leader of this pirate crew frowned. After looking at it for a while, he said, "Perhaps some sea monsters passed by and treated those who dared resist us as food bestowed by the gods. Perfect timing. If we feed it, it won't attack us." Upon saying this, the leader waved his hand. "Everyone, enjoy yourselves." As a fairly experienced pirate, he knew that there were many strange things at sea. It was best not to seek out the reason and try to figure out the truth. Since it didn't harm him or his crew, he would thank the Lord of Storms for his blessings, doing so as though nothing had happened. After making sure that there were people on duty, the pirates began gulping down copious amounts of alcohol, ate huge chunks of meat, and sang loudly, and fought for the rights to the young female captives. In the noisy and lively atmosphere, the pirate leader led a beautiful passenger that he had long taken a liking to into the captain's room. He eagerly began the final process for that night of revelry. In the middle of the night, the tired pirate leader stretched out his right hand and touched something cold. He jolted awake. Through the crimson moonlight shining through the window, he saw a piece of coarse wood in his arms. A series of branches with green leaves grew out from the wooden block, hugging him like a human's limbs. "Pa!" The pirate leader's pupils rapidly dilated. As he pushed away the wood, jumped off the bed, and stumbled back. Was I with such a thing previously? His mind was filled with terror. He couldn't care less about his clothes, picking up a flintlock and cutlass before leaving the room immediately. Outside, there was a pirate on duty. "How can I be happy to steal your ear?" When the pirate saw his leader open the door, he quickly asked. The pirate leader had originally wanted to chide the other party for secretly drinking, resulting in his incoherence. However, when he looked up, he saw that his subordinate's mouth and his surroundings were filled with golden grains. Even the surface of his tongue was covered in dense clusters. The pirate leader's scalp tightened as he felt a numbing chill run down his spine. At this moment, the door across the corridor opened as well. A pirate shouted with a sobbing tone, "Oh no! Boss, I have a lot of mushrooms growing there." As he spoke, the pirate ran out. At the same time, he felt his eyes itch. He raised his hand and rubbed his right eye. As he rubbed his eyes, a green vine slowly grew out from the gaps between his eye socket and his eyeball. There was a dark red grape at the end of it. The flesh around the grape was a blur. The pirate leader's body froze when he saw this. He asked in a voice that didn't belong to him, "What did you guys encounter?" While rubbing his eye, the pirates who didn't notice the problem said without any recollection, "A pole-like shadow struck me." "You." The pirate whose tongue was covered in golden wheat echoed. He was blocked by his leader and didn't see his fellow crew members' terrifying appearance. The pirate leader's legs began to shake uncontrollably. He instinctively turned around and ran out of the cabin. At this moment, he saw a long wall that looked like a shadow from a pole rapidly sweep towards him before lashing out at him. The shadow flashed and soon disappeared. It was as though it was a surreal nightmare. The pirate leader was just a beat slower before he subconsciously raised his hand to block. This was obviously not effective. Then, he looked at himself in panic and didn't find anything unusual. Thankfully. The pirate leader couldn't help but let out a sigh. Before he could finish, he suddenly heard a slightly muffled voice. Thankfully. This voice seemed to come from his body. The pirate leader's pupils dilated to the extreme as he involuntarily lifted up his clothes. He then saw 3 cracks appear between his chest, 1 big, 2 small. 2 rows of white teeth were neatly arranged in the large crack, and in the middle of the small crack were 2 lively and nimble eyeballs embedded in them. It was a mouth and 2 eyes. The pirate leader had a mouth and 2 eyes on his chest. No! A scream rang out from the boat, filled with indescribable terror. In the next 15 minutes, some of the pirates went mad and killed their companions. Some successfully escaped back to their own ship, only to discover that the people on it had also turned mutated. Hence, they jumped into the sea in despair. By the time everything calmed down, there were only about 10 normal pirates slumped on the deck and hiding in their rooms. There was a stench around them. After a while, passengers came out of the cabin one after another. They looked at the scene in front of them in disbelief. They either thanked the gods or stood there in a daze. It was early in the morning. Klein got out of bed and began to wash up. Just as he was changing his clothes with the help of his valet, Inuni, he saw butler Walter, who had just returned from a leave of absence, walk to the door and say, "Sir, Bishop Electra is here to pay a visit. Let him wait for me in the activity room where he can enjoy a cigar." Klein hesitated for a moment before saying. He suspected that this was a late response from the goddess. Walter immediately turned around and went downstairs to make the arrangements. Before long, he returned and said, "Sir, Bishop Electra has already bade farewell and left. He wanted me to tell you that you must go to St. Samuel Cathedral in the morning. He said that the church and the government are going to hold an air raid drill together." Air raid drill? Klein frowned. At that moment, his spiritual perception was triggered. He turned around and looked out the window. In the air, there were rows of dark brown-colored airships approaching. These airships had slanted patterns of red, white, and yellow emblems. This was the flag of Faysac. Upon seeing this scene, Klein suddenly understood what he had overlooked. War might not be initiated by the Lun Kingdom. An ancient and hidden organization definitely had very high-ranking members in other countries. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been able to affect the world's situation. Lord of the Mysteries Chapter 1083. Although the Sonia Sea wasn't like the Fog Sea, with it often being filled with fog, the northern regions would occasionally fill up with a rather thick fog every autumn and winter morning. Alger Wilson's Blue Avenger was sailing in such an environment, following the borders of the Sonia Island back to the Lung coast. He had already spent too long in the North Sonia Sea, so he needed to return for a routine report. Within the pale white fog, the ghost ship quietly proceeded forward, occasionally appearing like a dream that didn't leave any traces. Alger was wrapped by the wind as he stood in midair in front of the window, admiring the white world outside. He allowed his thoughts to wander in different directions. Suddenly, his eyes focused as some silvery white light flashed in his pupils. He saw a large sail through the fog in the distance, and a massive ship silently cruised past. This ship wasn't alone. Behind it were several similar ships. 1, 2, 3, they formed a fleet that spanned a great distance. Faysac Sonia Sea Fleet. They've all been mobilized. Where are they heading to? Alger's feet landed on the deck. His gaze immediately turned to the other side, where Sonia Island was located. After the various exchanges at the Tarot Club, Alger was already certain that the world's situation was tense, with war about to break out at any moment. At that moment, he made some connections and made a guess. To the Faysac Empire and the Lun Kingdom, Sonia Island was extremely important. If it were occupied by the Lun Kingdom, Faysak's eastern naval fleet would be completely blocked off in the cold north, unable to vie for any of the various colonies in the Sonia Sea or head to East Balam. Meanwhile, after waging war, if they wanted to threaten the Lun Kingdom's hinterlands, they would have to cross the Amatha mountain range or cross the Mid-Sea, passing through the defenses of several counties. That would be extremely difficult. And if Sonia Island was conquered by the Faysak Empire, then they could use that as a base to attack all the ports in the north and central regions of Lun, including but not limited to Inmat Harbour or Pritz Harbour. If the Faysak commander was more daring and unfazed by the losses, he could even be able to directly target the capital of the Lun Kingdom, Bakland, which was not far from the port. It was precisely because of this that the two countries had waged the 20-year war. The Faysak Empire clinched victory, and they had obtained the crucial southern path. In the Battle of the Violated Oath, Lun had won the war but had failed to regain this territory. Its strategic goals for the war were only half achieved. Alger stared at this scene for a moment before speaking in a serious tone, his war about to erupt. In Bakland, a large number of airships from Faysak had entered from North Borough and arrived above the huge city. As soon as they drew near, the Holy Wind Cathedral seemed to have made certain precautions. The howling of the wind intensified, turning into several giant bluish-black blades that whistled towards the target like surface-to-air missiles. Seeing that the huge blades were about to hit the airbags of the airship, an invisible layer of defense appeared and shielded it from all the attacks. Under the violent strike, the transparent wall shook, but ultimately managed to hold on. At the same time, the compartment for guns, projectile launchers, and cannons of the airship opened up and aimed downwards. Boom! As a hurricane around the Holy Wind Cathedral took form, a loud explosive boom emanated in every direction. In such a terrifying storm, the airships were like boats sailing through the sea where they met mountain-like waves and were about to be tossed into the distance. At that moment, the blood and rust-like beams of light flashed on the leading airship. They enveloped all the other accompanying airships and connected them together. Suddenly, Faysak's airship fleet had stabilized in the hurricane and was no longer a puny boat in the gigantic waves. The power of the high-level Red Priest pathway belonged to war, and war was the art of gathering the masses. This was the authority of a war bishop. After the Phasacians blocked this wave of attacks, they took advantage of the gap in between the wave of attacks to deliver their bombs through the hatches and allow them to drop beneath them. And in the hurricane, the trajectories of the bombs became unpredictable. Boom! Boom! The cannon hatches also lit up and showed off their prowess that would honor the god of war. This airship fleet didn't attempt to travel through Bakland. After entering North Borough, it immediately turned to West Borough, the center of politics for the Lun Kingdom. North Borough, Bakland University of Technology. The withered Inti's parasol tree leaves swayed in the wind. Students were either carrying books or bags as they walked around the campus. As a member of an institute of higher education, as the first batch of students of this reorganized university, these young adults were full of vigor. They looked forward to their future and would gather together every day to discuss their ideals, recite poems, and research technology. They were pure and happy. Melissa Moretti walked amidst them as she raised her head to look at the wall clock at the top of the main teaching building and involuntarily hastened her pace. She had to go to Chancellor Moment's office today to prepare for the upcoming mechanical laboratory that was to be officially launched. This was something that she enjoyed greatly, something which made her feel happy every day. She felt that life on campus was so wonderful and that her classmates were so adorable. Subconsciously, Melissa looked at the steam locomotive in the middle of the square. Its massive, complicated body was displaying its infinite charm in the machinery industry. Quite a number of students liked to gather there, knocking, hitting, and analyzing its structure. As for the school, it didn't encourage or forbid it. The corners of Melissa's lips curled into a smile as she moved to look away. Suddenly, a metallic grey object descended from the sky and landed in the middle of the square. Boom! The ground shook violently as all the windows of the main teaching building shattered. If not for the distance, Melissa might have been thrown up by the blast of air. Countless screams rang out, and like the other students, Melissa fled in panic, not knowing what had happened. She was only 16 years old after all. She had never experienced such a scene before. The billowing dust and smoke gradually fell. After hiding behind a tree, Melissa subconsciously looked at the spot where the explosion had just occurred. Her expression instantly froze, and her eyes glazed over. The steam locomotive's head was already in pieces, its components and fragments were scattered everywhere. The students around it, and those passing by, had already collapsed to the ground, their bodies no longer intact. They were no longer breathing. Some of them were covered in blood, others charred. There was some moaning in pain. This scene was like an oil painting that wasn't realistic enough. Melissa stared at it in a daze, momentarily at a loss for a reaction. She knew that male student who had a great spirit for research. Every time everyone was in discussion, he would confidently say that he was going to be a ship engineer. Now, he only had half his lower body left, and his intestines were all over the ground. Eudora was a student from the same faculty as her. Despite studying machinery, she loved poetry very much and was rather talented in this aspect. She was loved by the people around her. Sometimes, Melissa would also attend their gatherings and quietly listen to Eudora's recital. She felt that this girl was really attractive, but now her leg was badly mutilated, and she was moaning half-consciously in pain. In just a few seconds, these people's future had been cruelly changed. It was only when many teachers rushed out of the teaching block and started to rescue the injured and evacuate the students that Melissa woke up from her trance and hurriedly moved closer to the teachers. Listen to me. All of you are to split up into two groups. One batch will head to the laboratories, and the other to Tiffany Cathedral. They all have an underground area that you can hide in. One of the teachers wore a look of terror, but he still held his breath and made arrangements with his clear voice as though he had been specially trained. He looked around and saw that the students didn't dare to leave the teachers. He hurriedly said, "Don't worry. The enemy's airship has already turned and gone to Westborough. There's no danger here." His words were accompanied by a rumbling explosion that came from the southwest. Westborough? The kingdom's parliament, various departments, and municipal halls are there. Upon hearing the teacher's words, Melissa immediately thought of many things. As the light in her eyes flickered, she suddenly pursed her lips tightly and ran towards the school gate, ignoring her teacher calling from behind. As she moved along a sheltered area, Melissa quickly arrived on the streets. She panted heavily and looked around, trying to get her bearings. At that moment, she saw the subway entrance nearby. Although she was flustered, she still remembered what the teacher had just said. Underground area that you can hide in. Isn't the subway underground? The bombing has just started, and the subway probably hadn't stopped moving. As her thoughts raced, Melissa rushed towards the entrance that showed signs of bombardment. Upon going underground, she realized that the people here weren't as many as she had expected. Most ordinary people who had never been trained wouldn't think of hiding in here immediately. The subway had indeed not stopped moving, but no one was checking the tickets. After a short wait, Melissa ran over, her lips tightly pursed and her face filled with anxiety. After 3 stops, the subway stopped at King's Avenue. Melissa squeezed through the crowd and rushed out of the carriage. She had already recovered her stamina. She ran along the stairs, her speed increasing ever so slightly before she quickly reached the surface. At this moment, whatever she could see was in a state of chaos. Many buildings had collapsed as they were burning in scarlet flames. Broken limbs, blood, and the dead were everywhere. She could hear cries, screams, and orders. Explore up-to-date stories at no/vel/bin.com. Upon seeing this scene, Melissa became even more anxious as she tried to run towards the 4-story building where the kingdom's Ministry of Finance was located. However, the area had already been sealed. She could see that many window panes had shattered. The walls were riddled with bullet holes, and there were still traces of an explosion. Melissa tried to enter the perimeter but was stopped by the soldiers who were maintaining order. This only served to increase her anxiety as her eyes reddened. At this moment, she saw a familiar figure. It was the black-haired, brown-eyed Benson who wasn't wearing a hat. Upon seeing Melissa, Benson immediately rushed over. He looked anxious and angry as he shouted, "Why are you here? Why aren't you hiding underground? I'm very safe here. Quick, follow me there. Didn't you not go underground either?" Melissa, who had never been shouted at by her brother, wanted to instinctively retort, but her vision was already blurry. Phew. After he shouted, he let out a breath and softened his tone. "It's good that you're okay. Quick, don't wander around on the streets." Upon hearing his words, the panic and concern in Melissa's heart calmed down. At this moment, she felt that even if she were to die, it wouldn't be that scary anymore. At least, she wouldn't be the only one left at home. At this moment, a bomb was blown over by a hurricane and was landing towards the area. But suddenly, the bomb changed directions abruptly and flew off horizontally. Boom! It exploded in mid-air, only stirring up a blast of air. Lord of the Mysteries Chapter 1084. Boom! Boom! In the building at Sherwood Borough 17, Minsk Street, the female owner of the building, Stellan Sammer, and her maidservants heard a loud explosion from afar. She fearfully hid in a corner of the room, feeling as though the ground beneath her feet was trembling. Only after the constant, terrifying commotion started to fade away did she straighten her body and look left and right with an unusually strained mind. What exactly happened? The two maidservants simultaneously shook their heads. They were both at a loss and also afraid. As soon as she left the corner of the room, she instinctively wanted to walk out of the room and talk to her neighbors to figure out what had just happened. However, she was worried that another attack would happen again, so she had no choice but to pace around in the living room. After a few minutes, she suddenly heard the sound of the door opening. She quickly turned her head and realized that her husband, Luke Sammer, had returned with his valet. "Aren't you working?" Stellan asked subconsciously. The stout Luke replied solemnly, "I happened to pass by the vicinity and came back immediately." "Quick, put on your coat. Let's go to the cathedral now." "What happened? What happened?" Stellan asked again. Luke took 2 steps forward and said, "Faceax airships are bombarding Backland." "How? How could this be?" Stellan's eyes widened in disbelief. "Now is not the time to discuss this. Whatever it is, it has already happened. We have to go to the cathedral immediately." Luke gave his wife a hug. "Don't worry too much. I think those airships aren't heading over." All right. Stellan replied in a panic. As she wore the coat the maidservant had brought over, she instinctively said with concern, "What about the children?" Follow news stories at no/ve/in.com. They're at the church's school, so there will be people who will arrange for them to take shelter. "We don't have the time to reach them," Luke said calmly. "All right." Stellan made a prayer gesture, hoping that the deity she believed in would provide them with protection. The two of them, along with their male and female servants, quickly exited their house and walked towards the other end of the street. As she passed by Unit 58, Stellan took a glance and whispered, "Previously, I had laughed at Lawyer Eugen, saying that he gave up a lot of opportunities in Backland from moving to the south just because of Mrs. Doris's ailments. Now, I'm starting to envy him." Luke shot her a look and said, "Don't worry too much. It'll be fine." While walking quickly, Stellan couldn't help but ask, "Luke, are we fleeing Backland?" "No, there's no need." Luke Sammer answered firmly. This was just an accident. Seeing that his wife was clearly confused, he added, "Backland is the capital of the kingdom, so it has to be the most well-defended area." This time, it was just an oversight that no one expected. The next time, the Phasacians won't have another chance. The kingdom has the strongest military in the northern and southern continents. The Phasacians will definitely be taught a lesson. There's no way they can invade Backland again. After this, Backland will definitely be the safest place to be. "I see." Stellan felt that her husband's words made sense, and she was willing to believe him. After the explanation, Luke fell silent for a few seconds. "However, we still have to make some preparations. Once the church announces that we can move freely, we'll immediately fetch the children back and buy more food. We'll buy as much as we can. Inside a public school in the Backlund Bridge area. Due to the distance, Daisy and her classmates didn't realize what had happened in the North and West boroughs, nor did they sense the chaos that had spread from Hillston Borough to Sherwood Borough. However, teachers still came to their classrooms and arranged for them to line up to head to the nearest cathedral. This made Daisy recall the Great Smog of Backlund last year. Back then, they had also been asked to hide in the cathedral beside the school. Did something similar happen again? The trauma in Daisy's heart made her tremble slightly as she felt intense sadness and anger. When she passed by the door, she couldn't help but turn her head to look at the teacher in charge and ask, "Is it another disaster?" Maybe. The teacher didn't know the details and had only followed the orders sent by a telegram. Is there a disaster like this every year, or maybe even more than one? Daisy asked with a slightly ethereal voice with a tinge of innocence. The teacher looked at her with pity and shook his head. All difficulties will pass. God will protect everyone. Daisy didn't waste his time and followed the crowd to the nearest cathedral in a somewhat blank manner. North Borough, 22, Phelps Street. After hearing the explosion inside the Lund Charity Bursary Foundation, the first thing Audrey did was to conceal her dragon scales before rushing to the window. Seeing the airships with the FASAC flag appearing in the air and the bombs being carried away by a hurricane and being thrown into the distance, either landing on the ground and exploding or disappearing as though they had entered the spirit world, a thought flashed across her mind, the words that the world Mr. German Sparrow had said, as well as the mission of the psychology alchemists. She came to a realization. War had truly erupted. She immediately turned her head and said to the huge golden retriever, Susie, her personal lady's maid, Annie, and the others, "Quick, hide in St. Samuel Cathedral." Although Audrey didn't know how to deal with an air raid, the education she received from a young age told her to go to a cathedral as soon as possible if she ever encountered danger. In fact, she instinctively wanted to rush back to Empress Borough to protect her mother. However, considering that Annie, the other servants, and staff were ordinary people who lacked experience and the ability to deal with Sukharit crisis, she had no choice but to take care of them and accompany them to St. Samuel Cathedral. In order to resolve any dangers that she might encounter along the way, she planned to put on hand of horror and lie. On the one hand, she could distort the trajectory of bullets, while on the other hand, she could control flames and trigger the bombs in advance. In the face of long-range attacks, the beyonder powers of the spectator pathway were indeed not effective. While secretly protecting her servants and the Foundation staff, she successfully entered St. Samuel Cathedral and saw a few bishops and priests approaching her. "Miss Audrey, you don't have to worry about the Earl and his wife, as well as Lord Hibbert. They have people to protect them. An air raid like this won't harm them. Besides, you also know how grand your family basement is and how strong it is." One of the bishops quickly brought her to the side to console her. After taking off her fishnet gloves, she nodded and acknowledged the words of the bishop. She was no longer in a hurry to return home and instead asked, "What's the current situation like?" "The Phasacians have lost 2 airships and have moved towards West Borough. Don't worry, all the defenses have been mustered. They won't cause any further damage." After a simple exchange of words, the bishop led Audrey's group towards the underground area of the cathedral. And further below was where the Nighthawks were active. 160, Backlund Street. Butler Walter and a group of servants hid in an underground area which was used as a wine cellar. This was done under Dwayne Dantes' orders, and this gentleman had headed out to find Bishop Electra with his valet. After an unknown period of time, Walter and company heard a knock on the door. Through the peephole, they confirmed that their employer had returned. "There aren't any more raids now, but it's best you hide at St. Samuel Cathedral for a while," Klein said as he surveyed the area. "Yes, sir," Walter replied on behalf of the servants before asking, "And after that?" As a qualified butler, he often read the papers and understood that the situation was tense. It wasn't difficult to guess that a war would break out after the explosions. Klein thought for a moment before saying, "Once the church has verified the situation, we'll head to Mega Manor. You can bring your family along." No matter what, the capital of the kingdom is definitely a relatively safe place. And the manor at the periphery of the capital definitely wouldn't be a target of air raids, as it's of no value. Yes, there's enough food in Mega Manor, and there's a large supply of wine. Even if the war were to be extended for a long time, we won't have to worry about starving to death. Upon hearing the employer's words, the servants who had already formed a family immediately revealed looks of delight, wiping away their pale looks of fear. Walter expressed his gratitude directly. He said with some deliberation, "You can buy more food. Under such circumstances, no one will find it excessive. Also, there might not be any more attacks near Backland, but I can't say the same for security. The manor outside the city must be on guard." Klein nodded. "I've also considered this. I'll discuss this with Member of Parliament Marked and military personnel about purchasing a batch of decommissioned weapons and bullets. You must practice more. Anyway, during this period of time, Inuni and I will return to Backland to handle certain matters according to the situation. If there's anything I haven't considered, I'll make up for it later." As for the food, he didn't forbid Butler Walter from buying it. This way, if a famine really happened, he would have the ability to save them. After discussing the follow-up procedures, everyone in the residence of Dwayne Dantes packed up their luggage and brought their valuables. They followed their employer into St. Samuel Cathedral and arrived underground. With a single glance, he saw Audrey walking amidst the people, placating their moods. He smiled and nodded at her. Upon seeing Dwayne Dantes, Audrey smiled back and confirmed that nothing major had happened from his attitude. Force and Zio had moved again, but they were still at the borders of East Borough, and they were even closer to the Backland Bridge area. After waking up naturally, Force rubbed her hair and walked out of the bedroom to prepare lunch. As she looked around, she saw Zio, who had gone out early, sitting on a chair and flipping through the newspapers. "What's wrong?" Force asked blankly. Zio frowned and said, "The Phasacians air raids bombed North and West Borough." "What?" Force first blurted out before recalling the matters that had been discussed at the Tarot Club. At that moment, a paperboy's voice came from outside. "Extra! Extra! The kingdom declares war on Phasac! Extra! Extra! The kingdom declares war on Phasac!" Lord of the Mysteries Chapter 1085. Extra! Extra! The kingdom declares war on Phasac! On the way from Mega Manor to Backland, Klein heard the paperboy shouting on the streets with brisk steps while on a horse carriage. Although he had already made preparations, he still sighed after confirming that the war had truly erupted. He couldn't help but feel depressed again. The grudge from having Sonia Island, a key territory, taken away. The conflict over the rights of the colonies. The defeat from the previous war. The political corruption leading to a recession. Ever since the repeal of the Grain Act, many farmers of the kingdom have gone bankrupt due to the importing of foreign food products. The lower class live in abject conditions. The rich-poor divide only grew deeper. The middle class's blind confidence in the Lund Kingdom's might, and the eager desire to raise their own positions. The intensifying conflict between different political factions in high society leading to a fracture. The king and his faction wish for a large-scale war. With all these factors combined, just from an objective standpoint, and considering this from the angle of materialism, it's almost inevitable for Lund to start a war. Reality is the best author. Jumping out from his experience from the past, Klein scrutinized the Lund Kingdom's situation from a fresh point of view. He realized that the tides of the times had already formed and were surging over. Without a true deity's descent, it was completely unstoppable. In comparison, what puzzled him more was why the Phasac Empire would be willing to initiate a war. Even if the members of an ancient secret organization were indeed members of the upper echelons of Phasac or the Church of the God of Combat, key figures who had the right to make the decision, there was no way they could be alone in deciding such an important matter. How could the others agree to a world war? Could it be that the conflict between the various classes in the Phasac Empire has also completely escalated to the point that it urgently needs a war? With his lack of understanding of the Empire of the North, it was difficult for Klein to make an accurate judgment. But they just won the East Balam War and reaped more of the rights to the colonies. There's no reason for its situation to be more serious than Lund's. Yes, the royal family, the Einhorn family, is in control of the Red Priest pathway. It's understandable that they crave war, but the Church of the God of Combat has no reason not to stop it. As a member of the Orthodox Deity Alliance, they lacked the motivation to help Amorn's brother advance to Sequence 0. Thinking of this, Klein suddenly came up with a theory. Did that brother of Amorn realize that the goddess has already acquired the uniqueness of the death pathway and is in a critical stage, so he revealed this information to the Church of the God of Combat? And the God of Combat is in a neighboring pathway with the goddess, so there's no way he can ignore this matter. He will definitely make an intense response. Of course, it might not be done by the brother of Amorn. It might also be because of the Numinous Episcopate's artificial death faction's angel, Hater. After being warned by Einhorn Sauron Medici, this conspirer expert, he discovered the abnormalities ahead of time. On the one hand, he pretends not to notice anything and continues to set up a probe. On the other hand, he pulled in the Church of the God of Combat to worsen the situation and make it more chaotic. The Red Angel evil spirit is truly a symbol of war. If this is really the case, then it's inevitable for Faceac to wage this war. Furthermore, the matter regarding the uniqueness of the death pathway has no room for compromise. At the critical moment, the God of Combat might descend, causing a battle of gods that hasn't happened since the end of the Fourth Epoch to happen. This time, for the airship fleet from Faceac could stealthily to travel from the coast for nearly 100 kilometers without being detected, it would definitely have a weather warlock providing protection. Otherwise, even if they were to take a detour across places with few people, they'll still be seen ahead of time and definitely be stopped by the Lun airships. A weather warlock is an angel. Since the Fifth Epoch, the number of wars that have beyond us at this level are few and far between. After Emperor Razel's death, most soldiers don't even know of Beyond Us, even in the colonial wars. To have a weather warlock be involved in this means. Follow news stories at no/ve/in.com. This is really a battle that will sweep through the entire world. It involves battles at all levels. Is this what Amorn's brother wants? When the time comes, the Lord of Storms, the eternal blazing sun, the Earth Mother, the God of steam and machinery, the God of knowledge and wisdom will have to take their respective stances. Would the conflicts that they have temporarily suppressed for almost 2,000 years be escalated? Earth Mother likes the giants, and even amongst her blessed, they are Phasacians. And because of the splitting of Lenberg, Mason, and Seeger, these made the Fainapotter kingdom bear a bone-deep grudge with the Lun kingdom and Intis. The king's powers and the divine powers are highly likely to be unified, and they might form an alliance with Faceac. From the south to the north, they will attack Lun and Intis. Of course, countries like Lenberg and the Church of Knowledge, who are in the crossfire, will definitely try to stop it. As for Desi Bay, Fainapotter, and the Lun kingdom are directly connected, the south wouldn't be peaceful either. The more Klein thought about it, the more he felt that the situation in the northern continent would become abnormally chaotic. And no matter what direction it developed into, he couldn't stop it. Even if he were a sequence for demigod, under the tide of the times, there was no way for him to cause any major impact in this battle of gods, or exert any key influence. It would be pretty good if he could protect himself and the people he cared about. Previously, when the Faceac air fleet attacked, the first thing he did was arrange for Butler Walter and company to hide in the underground area that was used as a wine cellar. Then, he teleported to Backlund University of Technology. At that time, a bomb had already hit the ground. Some had died, and others were injured. The only thing he was thankful for was that his sister, Melissa, wasn't within the vicinity of the explosion. By the time Melissa and Benson met, the airships from Faceac didn't stay for long and quickly retreated from Backlund. Only then did he return to Dwayne Dantes' residence. Phew, Klein let out a slow sigh of relief. He turned his head to look out the window and saw that, after hearing that the kingdom was declaring war on Faceac, a small number of pedestrians on the street wore a look of horror as though they had recalled the air raid in the morning. Most of them wore blank expressions with a look of panic. They had no idea what they could do even if they wanted to. They might not have truly understood what this war would bring, but they instinctively felt that peace had been broken. The future was a chaotic mess, fraught with danger. Klein retracted his gaze and looked at his valet, Inuni, who was sitting opposite him. From his eyes, he realized that he was somewhat at a loss. He gave a half-smile and sighed. He raised his hand to rub his temples and wiped away his depressed and helpless feelings. He thought about what he could do and what he needed to take note of. No matter what, with this experience and lesson, the king's faction has had a war spark out as they wished. Before all of Lund collapses, it's nearly impossible for Fasak to invade Backlund again. It would be safer for Benson and Melissa to stay here. What's most worrisome is the lack of food and various assassinations. The latter is nothing. The place where Melissa and Benson live in is decided by their own levels. They aren't anywhere close to coming into contact with someone important who is a target for assassination, so they won't be implicated. Fortunately, Portland Moments Research Laboratory has just been established, and there are no results from it yet. It won't become a target that must be destroyed. As for the former, I can provide some help through Miss Audrey. The Winter County at the Holy Cathedral is located in the far north reaches of the kingdom, next to Fasak. It's always the front line of every war. Oriana might have returned to help the military. Oh, she might also be sent elsewhere to protect the coast. After all, the defenses of Backlund are sufficient. The royal family definitely has grade 0 sealed artifacts and also angels. The three churches most likely have hidden tricks up their sleeves. In that case, my greatest pillar of support is gone. At most, I can get some help from the church and use some sealed artifacts. In the past, I wasn't too worried about the effects the Red Angel Evil Spirit's return has on me. Now, I have to raise my guard for this matter. Patrick Bryan knows very well that Dwayne Dantes is equivalent to German Sparrow, who is equivalent to the Blessed of Death. I had intentionally revealed this information, hoping that it would direct the points of suspicion to Mr. Azik, the Death Consul. And now, this also means that the Red Angel Evil Spirit would be able to grasp this information in no time. The Red Angel Evil Spirit currently only has a high level, but his actual standard shouldn't have recovered to the level of an angel. There's no irreconcilable feud between him and me, nor do I have what he wants. Even if he knows that Dantes is equivalent to German Sparrow, it would be very unlikely for him to deal with me directly. Other than attacking me directly, what harm will it bring after he grasps this situation? Is he using this to set up a conspiracy or sell the intelligence to someone who needs it? What conspiracy? Who would want it? Many thoughts and names surfaced in his mind, but they were quickly eliminated by him. This included Amorn's brother and the Angel of Fate Ouroboros. From the Red Angel Evil Spirit's past actions, for the time being, he wouldn't make contact with Rose Redemption, and Amorn's brother is a sworn enemy of Medici and company. Suddenly, a name appeared in his mind. Zaratul. The leader of the secret order, the Sequence 1 Seer Pathway Angel, Zaratul, who had returned to normalcy after becoming mad. According to Rhodes's feedback, this powerful and concealed existence had already left his original location, and his whereabouts were unknown. Previously, Klein had been wondering if he would come to Backlund due to the law of beyond a characteristic convergence. Medici and the Zaratul and Zoroast families were serving under the Solomon Empire. Even if they weren't friendly with each other, they must be very familiar with each other. In the foggy town, Zaratul had met German Sparrow. If he really wants to pursue something, he would definitely chase after the crazy adventurer. With a thought in his mind, Klein instinctively began to assume that Zaratul was in Backlund in search of German Sparrow, and with that, he began to analyze the situation for other abnormalities. At almost the same instant that he thought of something, Klein recalled the failure of the joint operation between Sharon and the Sanguine. The Rose School of Thought is also looking for German Sparrow, so would Zaratul, who received the corresponding news, work with them? Back then, the operation was on the brink of success. The Rose School of Thought's person in charge in Backlund had left in a hurry. Clearly, he had only noticed the problem at the last moment. With the Sanguine preparing the corresponding sealed artifact, it's rather impossible for such a failure to happen. Even the Sanguine Duke was puzzled and confused, but what if it was thanks to the perceptive intuition of a Sequence 1 angel of the Seer pathway? This would explain it perfectly. Back then, Zaratul was sitting opposite the Rose School of Thought's Backlund person in charge? The Rose School of Thought retreated in a panic and had even deliberately left behind a doll to create moonlight and cleanse everything so as to cover up the existence of Zaratul. Also, the fact that German Sparrow has a certain relationship with the Death Consul isn't a secret. Will Zaratul spread out all his marionettes and sense if there's the power of death in Backlund? Previously, when Patrick Bryan was holding rituals, there was actually Zaratul's marionette watching him. If the Red Angel evil spirit has already sold the intelligence to Zaratul, then wouldn't my returning to Backlund Street in such a chaotic situation be giving myself up? His pupils constricted, and he immediately said to the coachman in front, "Just stop here. I suddenly thought of something else I need to settle." After he said that, he felt extremely tense, afraid that the coachman wouldn't answer him and continue driving. Fortunately, none of this happened. The horse carriage stopped by the side of the road, and with his valet, Inuni, Klein walked towards a small alley nearby. Immediately following that, he snapped his fingers and allowed the scarlet flames to emerge from his pocket, covering both himself and his marionette. He had to rush to St. Samuel Cathedral as soon as possible in a concealed manner. With a flash of flames, their two figures disappeared. However, after completing a leap, the flames within his senses suddenly disappeared, all of them. A spacious living room appeared in front of him. On an ordinary reclining chair was a tall and thin man. He was young and had southern continent blood in him. He looked rather handsome and appeared a little anemic. The Red Angel evil spirit, Sauron Einhorn Medici. This Red Angel played with a ball of scarlet-red flames in his hand as the corners of his mouth curled up. "You actually sensed it earlier than I expected." Head using flaming jump in front of me. Lord of the Mysteries Chapter 1086. The moment he saw the Red Angel evil spirit, Klein's pupils dilated. The human-skinned glove on his left hand suddenly turned transparent. He didn't listen to what the other party had to say. His instinctive reaction was to immediately teleport away, but at this moment, the spirit world that entered his eyes was different from usual. Countless transparent creatures in indescribable forms were all dyed in a color that was a mixture of iron and blood. The surrounding area was filled with thick smoke, and there were 7 rays of light that contained infinite knowledge hidden above them. It was almost impossible to see them. Klein's heart skipped a beat. He didn't rashly teleport. Upon seeing this, the Red Angel evil spirit chuckled. "What are you afraid of? Zaratul?" Upon hearing this, Klein subconsciously looked around, but he didn't discover anything unusual. The Red Angel evil spirit maintained that annoying smile and pointed to the sofa opposite the reclining chair. "If I had already informed him that Dwayne Dantes is German Sparrow, and that you will return to 160 Backlund Street in the morning, then the person waiting in the wine cellar wouldn't be a living person. Instead, he would be your hung-up butler and servants, looking as though they were ham left to dry age. Of course, they would similarly welcome you warmly. Sit. Under such circumstances, listening to my thoughts and intentions first isn't a bad thing." He imagined the scene described by the Red Angel evil spirit. Although Klein had done similar things himself, his hair stood on end, and he was horrified. He kept his guard up, allowing the marionette, Konas Kilger, in the form of Dwayne Dantes to sit on the sofa while he waited by the side as though he was his personal servant, Inuni. He had unknowingly swapped places with his marionette and instantly changed their appearances. "Perhaps it's because you just learned of this information from Patrick Bryan, and you haven't even informed Zaratul yet," Klein retorted through his marionette. At the same time, he determined from the words of the Red Angel evil spirit that Zaratul had really come to Backlund. This was a complete and unrestricted, terrifying, and bizarre Sequence 1 angel. It was enough to be called a hidden existence. The Red Angel evil spirit's gaze swept across the valet and his master before smiling. "I'll be able to get something I want to know in 15 minutes from a fool like Patrick Bryan." Furthermore, an entire night and a morning has passed since the ritual. You and Miss Messenger might have something in common. Klein made the marionette raise his eyebrows. And so? The Red Angel evil spirit gently rocked the reclining chair it was in. I'm not sure if you've heard of such a saying. When you choose a beyond a pathway, your corresponding friends and enemies will be determined. As for us, we aren't friends, but we aren't enemies either. Of course, you did have some conflicts with me, but no one suffered any great losses. The matter has passed. To me, your growth will bring great trouble to a few people I hate, so I don't want to kill you in advance. I'm happy to see you continue your advancement. The Emperor had said similar words. A few people he hates. Klein deliberated and asked, Blasphemer Morn? Not that ignorant and not that stupid either. The Red Angel evil spirit laughed and stroked his chin. Be it his words or actions, he gave people the urge to hit him. After some thought, Klein calmly pointed out a question. Then you can definitely choose Zaratul. If he can rise up because of this, he will similarly bring about extreme trouble for Blasphemer Amorn. Compared to him, I'm still too weak. I'll still need a long time to grow. There are too many possible accidents from this point forth. The Red Angel evil spirit nodded seriously. Indeed, that's what I thought in the beginning as well. A fellow like you, who isn't much stronger than a wild dog, what are you going to use to compete with the already sequence 1 Zaratul? Die faster than anyone else? At this point, the Red Angel evil spirit changed the topic and sighed. However, if one can choose the most ideal proposal in this world, that would be too wonderful. Before he could finish his sentence, a bloody gash appeared on his left bloody cheek. The wound opened up in a wide manner, opening and closing like a mouth, and revealed 2 rows of illusory white teeth. I've investigated. The collapse of the Sauron family was caused by Zaratul and Rizel. Is this the spirit left behind by the ancestor of the Sauron family? The dissociation of the Red Angel is worse than I imagined. No, this isn't considered a normal split personality, but 3 people being stuffed into one body. No matter what they do, they have to first come to a unanimous decision or there will be internal strife. Klein believed that the Red Angel evil spirit wasn't setting up a trap, but that he had no way of informing Zaratul of the relevant information. This is his weakness. I can use it in the future. Klein muttered silently before asking, then why did you come to me? Just to say those words? The Red Angel evil spirit raised its hand to rub his left cheek, causing the mouth that appeared to slowly disappear. At the same time, he smiled and said, aren't you investigating the Lun royal family? It seems to involve a high-ranking demonist named Katarina. If you have any tracks from her, inform me before you carry out any operation. Saintess of White Katarina. Why is the Red Angel evil spirit looking for her? The Hunter pathway sequence for can cause women to become men. The sequence 7 of the demonist pathway can make men into women. This should be 2 separate beyonder pathways that can be interchanged. The Red Angel evil spirit can't find a suitable Hunter pathway beyond a characteristic, so it plans to jump to the demonist pathway. That's right. As an evil spirit, as long as he resolves his issue of survival, he can still advance using potions and characteristics. Klein was first taken aback before he used the secrets he knew of to come up with a guess. He suddenly had a strange idea. When there are both high sequence beyonder characteristics of the Hunter and demonist pathways within a body, would the Red Angel evil spirit display a male form or a female form? Whoever has a higher level and is in charge decides. At that moment, the Red Angel evil spirit looked at Dwayne Dantes and his valet and scoffed. You have a great talent for provoking others. I haven't said anything. Klein inwardly replied in a daze. The Red Angel evil spirit curled his lips and said, I can guess what you're thinking, unless you admit that you're ignorant. However, this might be a good thing for them. Shut up. A bloody mouth appeared on both sides of the Red Angel evil spirit's cheeks. Looking at the dissociative identity disorder happening before him, Klein rationally gave up on the idea of going deeper into the topic and said, it's not impossible to inform you in advance, but the problem is how should I inform you? From his point of view, the demoness of unaging, Katerina, was a vile person. It was the same with the Red Angel evil spirit. It wasn't a bad thing to have them clash. The Red Angel evil spirit smiled and said, "Of course it's by reciting my honorific name. The great god of war, the symbol of iron and blood, the ruler of chaos and strife." Pooey. The mouth on both sides of the Red Angel evil spirit's cheeks let out a disdainful sound, as though they didn't approve of it. This is a standard deity's honorific name. After gaining control of the uniqueness, to a certain extent, Medici had already become a quasi-god? And as long as no one can accommodate the uniqueness of the Red Priest pathway, this evil spirit's level will not drop. The honorific name will always point towards him? Klein nodded thoughtfully and probed, "What do you know about the secret ruins of Blood Emperor Alistair Tudor?" Upon hearing this name, the Red Angel's facial muscles twitched slightly before sneering. "Are you asking what the secret of the Lun royal family is? You might not know this, but you might be familiar with the Blood Emperor's secret ruins," Klein said deliberately. The Red Angel evil spirit suddenly laughed out loud and slapped the armrest of the reclining chair. "Your tricks are so childish that they look like a 3-year-old's. Ha ha, the secret hidden by the Lun royal family is very simple. I could guess it just by reading the newspapers. TSK, you only have a smart-looking face. Your brain is filled with squirming worms. You can guess it just by reading the newspapers?" Klein frowned and asked. The Red Angel evil spirit finished laughing and curled his lips. "Of course, it needs some basic knowledge. I believe you should have it. How about this? I'll ask you a few questions, and you'll understand how simple the answer is. Is that Blood Emperor secret ruins the kind known by the churches?" "No." Klein shook his head firmly. The Red Angel evil spirit smiled and continued asking, "Do you know which sequence the Blood Emperor, Alistair Tudor, was in before he advanced to Sequence 0? "The Black Emperor pathway, Sequence 1 Prince of Abolition," Klein calmly replied. The Red Angel evil spirit nodded slightly. "Did you know that before Alistair Trunsoist became Blood Emperor, he was one of the 2 consuls of the Tudor Trunsoist United Empire, and that the one supporting him were 6 of the 7 present deities, including Evernight and Storm?" Klein nodded and gave an affirmative answer. The half-slumped Red Angel evil spirit crossed one leg over the other. "Then do you know that, after Alistair became Blood Emperor, he had truly gone mad and even died during the Battle of the Gods?" "Kind of." Klein didn't dare to be too sure, because this was something he had read from Rozelle's diary, and the Emperor had learned it from Mr. Dorr. The Red Angel evil spirit chuckled and said, "Then do you think that Alistair Tudor would have the rationality and opportunity to leave behind secret ruins after he became Blood Emperor?" "No." Klein slowly shook his head. The Red Angel evil spirit spread its hands and said, "Since it's a ruin left behind by Alistair before he became Blood Emperor, and if the 6 deities who supported him aren't aware of it, what could it be? If you had a choice, would you take a path destined to go mad?" This? Klein instantly thought of the 9 mausoleums that the Black Emperor needed in the ritual needed to become a god. To a Prince of Abolition, before the return of the former Black Emperor, secretly seeking out a way to advance to Black Emperor was something he wanted to do. "Is that ruin related to the Black Emperor?" Klein asked in a deep voice. The Red Angel evil spirit rubbed his chin and chuckled. "You seem to know the Black Emperor's ritual. Isn't that simple? What has the King of Lund been doing in the past 2 to 3 years? The Grain Act was abolished, there's the Civil Servant Unified Examination, a restructuring of the military, the House of Lords and Nobles are struck down a notch, strengthening the authority of the House of Commons. Isn't this something that was published in the newspapers? Besides, isn't it common knowledge that the Justiciar pathway can be switched to the Black Emperor pathway?" As many of these things were the trends of the times to Klein, with one of them being pushed by him, he had never considered them from a mysticism perspective in the past. Now that they were connected, he immediately understood. Soon, he recalled something else. Read latest novels at nuv/e/l/bin.com. The last person who wanted to become Black Emperor was Roselle. He happened to be related to Amorn's brother. Lord of the Mysteries Chapter 1087. The Grain Act was abolished, the civil servant unified examination. A concession was made, bringing the church's forces into the military. These seem to be in line with the trends of the times, but in essence, they're oppressive, weakening the nobles, and supporting a new class. Compared to the previous 1,000-year rule, this can really be considered to be against the norm. It's the order needed to become Black Emperor. In the past decade or so, the changes in architecture style have been very drastic as well. For Roselle to be able to obtain the uniqueness and obtain the corresponding sequence 1 beyond a characteristic, that ancient secret organization must have put in quite a bit of effort. It might have even provided part of it directly. When this emperor perished, who took away those characteristics? Also, Bernadette has been in Backland for the past few months and has been coming here frequently. The main issue is that the asymmetrical aesthetics of the empires in the Fourth Epoch had affected my understanding, making me believe that rules that violate normal circumstances are odd and against the order that humans would strive for. Now that I think about it again, what does it mean by normal circumstances? Isn't it just something that everyone has already gotten used to and therefore won't have an instinctive sense of resistance towards it? From the tribes to the countries, from feudalism to republicanism, don't they all violate the normal circumstances of the period they were in, with countless people wishing to return to the past? The phrase old fogies and leftovers from the old dynasties encompasses this problem. From the looks of it, as long as a deity doesn't intervene, the revolution that the Black Emperor needs will definitely happen. It's just a matter of time. With the tides of the time surging over, it's really hard to stop it. That brother of Amon is indeed a powerful and terrifying author. In the depths of the Blood Emperor's ruins, there should be a mausoleum similar to a pyramid. And according to the ritual requirements, one has to drive one's citizens to build it. Therefore, there are cases of people going missing in the East Borough and overseas slave trade. When the war develops to a certain stage, using the excuse of praying for victory, or the nation's mourning for soldiers, a huge gathering with a large number of citizens can be convened to participate in the sacrificial ritual in the various cities in the royal capital. Yes. Many years ago, the Lun royal family obtained the crown of the Balaam Empire, and they connected the king's name to the title of emperor. Check out latest novels on novel/bin.com. What a great plan! When he was alerted by the Red Angel evil spirit's questions, Klein's mind tensed up. Many thoughts flashed through his mind, and at the same time, he had another question. He looked at the tall, thin, young gatekeeper who didn't look rosy. He said after some deliberation, George III wishes to directly become Black Emperor? But he isn't even at sequence 4. Even if George III could act ahead of time to make himself more talented and reduce the impact caused by the mental imprint in the potion, Klein didn't believe that a sequence 5 beyonder could become a god directly. Unless he was lucky enough with that very slim chance of success. And such luck wasn't something that could be described simply as being sufficient. The Snake of Mercury who represents fate, Will or Septin, didn't even dare to directly devour the die of probability, and he had to seriously find a way to accommodate it. The Red Angel evil spirit scoffed when he heard that. How do you know that George III is only sequence 5? How are you so sure that the George III under investigation is the real George III? Could it be that he was imagined into existence, or could it be a faceless at the angel level? These are truly very difficult things to accomplish, but to a certain zealot, these are all within the scope of one's ability and the resources in one's grasp. I suspect that George III is an official member of the secret organization that was created to mimic our Rose redemption. His true level might already be at the angel level. I wouldn't be surprised if he is already at sequence 1. This, Emperor Roselle once said that the members of that ancient secret organization are all important figures that he couldn't imagine. When they combine forces, other than dealing with the 7 churches, there's nothing that can't be done. This actually includes the king of a country? That's right, later on, the emperor also became the ruler of Intis. Zealot. Is this what the Red Angel evil spirit thinks of Amon's brother? Although this is clearly a little extreme, with a strong bias, there's a certain reason for it. A nickname isn't given randomly. Klein made his marionette frown slightly. You seem to be able to see through the truth of this matter easily, but why hasn't the Church of Evernight, Storm, and Steam realized this problem? Their understanding of the Black Emperor is no less than yours. After all, the two churches of the Evernight and the Storm had supported the Tudor Trunsoist United Empire. The Red Angel evil spirit wore an amused expression again as he sized up Dwayne Dantes and his valet. How old are you? Why are you still so naive and childish? The 6 deities and the 6 churches are not necessarily equivalent at times. The things the 6 deities know might not be told to the angels and saints beneath them. The Red Angel evil spirit let out a chortle again when he saw that Dwayne Dantes was still frowning in confusion. Trust me, what I said, and what I'll be saying next, is undoubtedly a form of provocation to ruin the image of the 6 deities, but you can consider whether it's the truth. Let's put it this way. In regards to someone wanting to become the Black Emperor, the attitude of the 6 deities, the 7 deities, is rather ambiguous. They often have conflicts of their own. More precisely, they are happy to see a mentally sound Black Emperor be born, but they also wish that it's one they support. Therefore, they will not give any detailed revelations to the various churches. They will only follow the normal procedure and deliver punishment if there are results to the investigation. Otherwise, they will tacitly approve of its development. Of course, during this process, we cannot eliminate the possibility that a certain existence might want to do some damage, but it will not be so direct and obvious, because it will definitely be stopped by the other deities. If it wasn't because he knew of them taking such attitudes, how could George III dare take the risk? All right, now that the war has broken out, he has overcome the crisis. He can wait for the next opportunity. At that moment, Klein thought of the news that had been leaked out during the operation launched at the Blood Emperor ruins. He was momentarily unsure if he should suspect that the upper echelons of the 3 churches had a member of the ancient secret organization, or that a certain deity had personally reminded Amorn's brother. And if it were the latter, the suspect was undoubtedly not the Lord of Storms. After a moment of silence, Klein hesitantly asked, "So, as long as nothing goes wrong, George III will carry out the ritual to become a god, despite everything that he has done? And if everything goes smoothly and he survives the backlash from the potion, will he ascend to the throne of Black Emperor?" The Red Angel evil spirit replied in a relaxed tone, "Is there a problem? Why would the 7 deities?" Klein couldn't help but ask. The Red Angel evil spirit scared and said, "Do you want to know?" "If you want to know, I can tell you now." Just as he was about to say of course, Klein suddenly recalled the warning that Mariana had given him. There are some things that make it easier to be infected the more you know. Both your body and soul will be infected. Once you become an angel, you can seek out the exact answer. As these thoughts flashed through his mind, Klein made his marionette smile. "Forget it then." "Very good. You nearly died out of curiosity and foolishness." The Red Angel evil spirit shook his head regretfully. He then looked out the window and said, "If there's nothing else, you may leave." "All right." Klein made the marionette stand up and raise his right hand. At this moment, the half-slumped Red Angel evil spirit suddenly asked, "I have this nagging feeling that if I had attacked you just now, you wouldn't be completely helpless, am I right?" "Of course, why do you think I chose flaming jump instead of teleporting?" "That was to hide the burning of the paper crane in my wallet. This way, Snake of Fate or Septin's gaze would silently land on me. If anything happens, he would use the yesterday once more charm. To deal with an existence at your level, one can't be too careful." How could one not be careful and keep a trump card hidden? Klein didn't directly answer the Red Angel evil spirit's question. He smiled and expressed his tacit agreement. "Pa." He snapped his fingers, causing scarlet flames to surge out of his pocket and envelop him. As the scarlet streams dispersed, Klein's figure disappeared in front of the Red Angel evil spirit. Backlund, at Dr. Aaron Sirius's home, in a black pram. The chubby baby rubbed his eyes and muttered silently, "Backlund really isn't suitable for children to live in." 39 Beauclund Street. Having done a divination, Klein saw Member of Parliament Mark who was about to head to Westborough. "Didn't you go to Mega Manor?" "I'm planning on letting Rihanna and Hazel hide in Moose Manor." Mark pinched the sockets of his eyes. I wonder when this side effect will disappear. Klein retracted his gaze from this action and sighed. I have to prepare some weapons for the manor, so I came to seek your help. Also, if you have the means to get food, you can help me buy some. In his opinion, the low-level citizens weren't able to stock up on food because they didn't have any money at all. At most, they would stock up a few days' worth of food. Therefore, his purchase wouldn't affect them for the time being. Once the food situation worsened, he could donate more of it through Miss Audrey. Before food rationing was implemented, if Klein didn't stockpile, other rich people would do so. Furthermore, they might not donate it. No problem, Mark agreed without any hesitation. Klein didn't ask about the price, because he had given housekeeper Tunager a total of £5,000 for such matters. Of course, after confirming that Zaratul was in Backland and that Dwayne Dante's being equivalent to German Sparrow was known to the Red Angel evil spirit, he decided not to return to Mega Manor. He planned on changing his identity so as not to affect the innocent. As for the excuse, it had been arranged by the Church of Evernight that he would perform certain tasks and that he was unable to return for a long period of time. If there was a charity event that required his help, he gave Miss Audrey the authority to stand in his place. Lord of the Mysteries Chapter 1088. On the way to St. Samuel Cathedral from Bockland Street, Klein passed by the Lund Charity Bursary Foundation at 22 Felt Street. He was surprised to find that the door was still open. As the initiator and current director, he placed quite a bit of concern over this matter. He temporarily slowed down and walked over. Just as he entered the door, he saw Miss Audrey walking down from the second floor with her personal maidservant, a big golden retriever, and a few staff members beside her. Good afternoon. In this situation, there doesn't seem to be a need to insist on doing anything. Klein went forward and voiced out his doubts. Audrey held the newspaper in her hand as she looked at Dwayne Dante's. Some of our beneficiaries were injured in the air raid. I just went to visit them and arranged for follow-up treatment. The noble lady's eyes were slightly red, as though she had seen all sorts of heart-wrenching scenes in the hospital. May the goddess bless them. Klein came to a realization and drew a crimson moon on his chest. He took the opportunity to say the idea that he had come up with long ago. I plan to donate some more money to buy food, medicine, and medical equipment for the foundation. In this man-made disaster, we can do more things. A brilliant idea. Those who are suffering will be grateful to you from the bottom of their hearts, Mr. Dantes. Audrey tapped her chest 4 times in a fluid motion. There was obvious joy and pity in her eyes. I will do my best as well. She didn't want to just donate money, but to spearhead certain matters. Klein nodded. You don't have to praise me. At times like these, I only did what I should do. Apart from donating funds, I will also donate food. All of you can discuss this directly with my butler, Walter. Yes, Miss Audrey, I can write a letter of authorization to you now so that you can use my name to transfer the resources of Mega Manor. What about you, Mr. Dantes? Audrey asked with a vague guess. This was the most normal response in such a conversation. I received a notice from the church that I need to help them perform certain tasks. As for what they are, I haven't gone to St. Samuel Cathedral yet, so I'm not sure either. The only thing I can confirm is that I have to travel around. I won't be able to return to Mega Manor for a long time. Klein gave the reason he had come up with previously. Miss Audrey, during this period of time at the Foundation, I have come to understand your character and ability. Your background and standing also determine your visions and style. Handing these matters to you is the best solution I can come up with. Klein didn't expect his lies to fool a senior spectator. He only wanted to deceive the people around just to see, oh, these people didn't include the dog. Does Mr. World want to temporarily give up on his identity as Dwayne Dante so that he can perform certain matters in secret? Feeling enlightened, Audrey pretended to think. After a few seconds of silence, she said, with the current situation, I can't refuse such a request. Klein secretly heaved a sigh of relief. he immediately got his personal servant, Inunai, to go upstairs to get a piece of paper and a pen. Then, while being witnessed by the staff, he personally drafted a letter of authorization, signed his name, printed his thumbprint, and stamped the seal. After doing all of this, Klein cast his gaze at the newspaper in Audrey's hand. "Is there anything else? I just came back from outside the city. I only heard the paperboy shout that the kingdom has declared war on Faysac." Audrey pursed her lips and said with a slightly gloomy expression, "Not long after the airship fleet from Faysac attacked Backland, their Sonia Sea fleet took advantage of the thick fog to attack the Imperial Navy's base at Pritz Harbor's Oak Island and the shipyards in the surrounding area. Fortunately, the Church of the Lord of Storms received a warning beforehand and sent a telegram in advance. Pritz Harbor wasn't lost, but it lost quite a number of ships and factories. It said that many people died and were seriously injured. This is war." Klein sighed. "Can I see how the king declared war?" Audrey knew that there was something wrong with King George III, so she could tell that Mr. World was hiding his contempt. She didn't refuse and handed the newspaper over. It was the Tussock Times. Without needing to spread it open, he directly saw the king's declaration on the headlines. 708 years ago, the Phasacians took away Sonia Island from us. A year ago, the Phasacians stole half of our interests in East Balam. Today, they bombarded Backland and attacked Pritz Harbor. Many Lonies were killed and injured, and their blood has stained the ground. There's no way for us to back down any further. We can only be bullied again and again by the Phasacians if we back off. If we continue retreating, we will lose all our interests overseas. Large amounts of our products will not be sold. Countless workers will lose their jobs, and even more peasants will go bankrupt. Everything from the past and now states that justice is in our hands, and we have enough strength to seize complete victory. Everyone, I, your Emperor, George III, represent the Parliament and the Kingdom's government to declare war on Faysac. Unless they raise the white flag and surrender, we will never stop advancing. Advance, we shall take back Sonia Island. Advance, we shall conquer St. Milam. Victory will definitely belong to us. The gods will be with us." Klein quickly browsed through it and used his clown ability to stop his lips from curling up. He then returned the Tussock Times to Audrey. He took off his hat and bowed. "I'll leave the rest to you." "I will, please rest assured." Audrey held the letter of authorization and newspapers and bowed. Without any further delay, Klein left the Lund Charity Bursary Foundation with his valet, Inunai, and arrived at St. Samuel Cathedral. At that moment, the church no longer had many believers present. Most of them had returned to their homes, busy preparing for their life with war having been declared. In the dark and quiet environment, Klein found a seat and sat down. He took off his hat, clasped his hands, and placed them in front of his mouth and nose. He softly recited the honorific name of the Evernite goddess, then said, "I received news from the Red Angel Evil Spirit that it's very likely that Zaratul has already arrived in Backland. As for the secret ruins of the Blood Emperor, there's a high chance that it's the mausoleum needed for the Black Emperor ritual." After the prayer, Klein waited patiently for a while. He saw the Archbishop, Anthony Stevenson, enter from the side door and walk towards him. This saint was clean-shaven. He wore a black robe that had the Crimson Moon's emblem on it. He walked without making a sound, as though he was the night that slowly descended. Anthony didn't say a word after he approached Dwayne Dantes. He only signaled with his eyes before turning towards the library. With that, Klein got up, put on his hat, and followed silently behind. As for his personal servant, Inunai, he held his cane and walked to the entrance of the cathedral to wait. Outside the library, Archbishop Anthony turned around and revealed a smile. He said to Dwayne Dantes, "War has erupted. There are too many things that need to be done. As a devout believer of the goddess, are you willing to provide some help?" "Indeed. From the looks of it, Moriona has left Backland." As Klein sighed, he drew the Crimson Moon on his chest. "It's my honor. Praise the lady." After responding, he immediately asked, "What do you need me to do?" "I'll inform you when needed." Try not to go home during this period of time, Saint Anthony said in an illogical tone. And in an instant, he understood what the other party meant. He had to hide for now. They had no time to deal with Zaratul. At most, they could provide him protection within a certain range. Just as I thought, the goddess is digesting the uniqueness of the death pathway. She will not be able to do a divine descent for a long period of time. The upper echelons of the church have to deal with the war, while the negative effects of Grade 0 sealed artifacts are more terrifying than the last. Klein nodded gently. Yes, Your Grace. May the goddess bless you. Saint Anthony drew the crimson moon. Praise the Lady. The only escape is tranquility. Klein responded with a familiar gesture. Then, he left St. Samuel Cathedral and headed to another street with his valet. After walking for a while, both of them disappeared at some point in time. East Borough, in a 2-bedroom rental apartment. Wearing an ordinary face, Klein took out the adventurer's harmonica and blew at it. Soon, Rionette Tinker walked out of the void with 4 blonde, red-eyed heads in hand. She wasn't surprised by her contractor's appearance. Without giving a letter, he directly said, "Tell Miss Sharon and Marie that Zaratul has come to Backland and is very likely to be in contact with the Rose School of Thought. They must be careful. It's best not to go to the Bravehearts bar in the near future." Zaratul. This time, Rionette Tinker's forehead spoke at the same time, as though they had spent a great deal of effort to recall who it was. Leader of the Secret Order, a Sequence 1 angel who once lost his mind before becoming normal again. Klein took out a gold coin and handed it to Miss Messenger. He didn't mention that Zaratul was very interested in German Sparrow. He believed that, as a high-level spirit world creature, Miss Messenger would be able to sense his uniqueness to a certain extent. Otherwise, there was no need for this angel to lower her status to be his messenger. If it was for yesterday once more charms, she could provide him help in a more decent manner. As for why Zaratul didn't discover the grey fog's aura in the foggy town, but now shows interest in German Sparrow, Klein believed that there were 3 reasons. The first reason was that the grey fogs beyond a convergence had compelled this powerful seer to come to Backland, and he predicted something. The second reason was that German Sparrow was able to leave the foggy town despite receiving the wrong symbol and return to the real world. The third reason was that German Sparrow was likely related to the organization that believed in the fall. By the time Zaratul came into contact with the Rose School of Thought and realized that the Mother Tree of Desire was somewhat interested in German Sparrow, even if he didn't have a guess, the importance he placed on German Sparrow would still rise exponentially. Rionette Tinker didn't say anything else. One of the heads tilted forward and bit the gold coin. After watching Miss Messenger leave, he pulled a chair and sat down. He sized up the sky outside the window across a wooden desk. The layout of the rental apartment was the same as the one he used to live in Tingen City. There was a bedroom inside, and outside of it was a living room, dining room, and study room. There was also a bunk bed. At that moment, in the room, other than him, there were only his marionettes Konas and Inuni. Lord of the Mysteries Chapter 1089. After sitting for a while, Klein raised his hand to rub his temples. He then stood up, took 4 steps counterclockwise, and went above the grey fog. He then conjured German Sparrow. By praying to Mr. Fool, he sent messages to Danitz and the hermit Catlear. The message for the former was to remind him to be careful of the Secret Order. Although he didn't believe that Zaratul would directly seek out Danitz, a person who had crossed paths with German Sparrow on the surface, there was nothing wrong with reminding him regardless. As a bizarro sorcerer, Klein had a certain level of understanding of the beyondness of the seer pathway. He believed that those who could truly advance to such a state were sufficiently cautious and careful. This didn't exclude certain oddities and exceptions, but it definitely didn't exclude Zaratul, who was at Sequence 1. And in this situation, in the eyes of an angel who was in control of enough secrets, Danitz was more like bait that was deliberately thrown out to fish for certain targets. Therefore, it was highly likely that Zaratul would very carefully and cautiously avoid him. At most, he would send members of the Secret Order to do some direct or indirect investigations. By the same logic, the message that Klein gave the hermit Cat Lear had the same content. However, this wasn't the main point. The main point was for her to immediately contact Queen Mystic Bernadette, saying that German Sparrow wanted to meet her as soon as possible. In addition, he also informed the Admiral of Stars something he wanted to delay till the next tarot gathering, that she was to decide if she wanted to purchase the Sequence 5 Druid and Sequence for Classical Metallurgist of the Planter Pathway. West of the Berserk Sea, there was Island. Danitz, who was gathering clues about Vice Admiral Ailment, held a cup filled with golden beer when his expression suddenly became extremely complicated. "What's wrong? You saw someone and recalled an indescribable encounter?" Anderson shook the Lanty-proof distilled liquor in his hand as he teased the abnormal Danitz. Danitz gulped down a mouthful of beer and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand before saying with a somewhat depressed expression, "We have to be careful of Secret Order members from now on." Ever since he met German Sparrow, such words were a common occurrence for him. His initial reaction had gone from the point of panic to numbness and depression. He suspected that one day, he would be listed as being wanted by all organizations of different sizes, except Mr. Fool's organization. Anderson sized up Danitz when he heard that as he chuckled. "Sometimes, I feel that German Sparrow is more like a hunter than me." "Heh, so the two of you have a special method of communication. You don't even need to summon a messenger." Danitz was just about to say a few perfunctory words when a person from Intis rushed into the tavern. He held a telegram and shouted, "Faysac launched an air raid on Backland. Lun has officially declared war." Declared war? Anderson and Danitz looked at each other. By relying on their pathway's characteristics, they acutely caught the scent of a large-scale war. Faysac attacked Backland and Pritz Harbor, and in return, Lun has officially declared war. The 3 ironclad warship fleets weren't at the harbor, so there wasn't many losses. They're heading back to the Lun coast. Cat Lear's crew happened to pass through Oravi Island, and they had gathered all sorts of information from the telegrams. Just as she was thinking about how the pirate crew would react in this situation, she suddenly saw an endless grey fog and heard the word German Sparrow. "Be careful of the Secret Order members. Be careful of Zaratul." As someone from Intis to a certain extent, what caught Cat Lear's attention was something that with the least importance. And it was precisely because of this that she had no doubts about the world German Sparrow's request to meet the Queen as soon as possible. She believed that this was related to the Secret Order and Zaratul. Finally, she said the 2 potion names softly: Druid. Classical Metallurgist. This Sequence 4's modern name should be the Ancient Metallurgist. It was previously called Human Metallurgist. Cat Lear subconsciously walked to the window and cast her gaze down. On these seas, which had a time difference between it and Backland, Frank Lee, an artisan sea elf, were leaning on the side of the ship sunbathing. The former character relaxed expression and looked very pleased, but there was a pensive look in his eyes. It was as though there were still some problems that couldn't be resolved. The latter's face was pale, and his lips were quivering. Scattered over his clothes were mushrooms. Druid. Ancient Metallurgist. Admiral of Stars. Cat Lear repeated the 2 turns again, feeling as though something was pressing down on her. After about 10 seconds, Cat Lear adjusted the heavy glasses on her nose bridge and consoled herself. Mr. Fool didn't give any warnings. It means it's not a big deal. With this thought in mind, specks of bright light floated down, forming a staircase of light between the captain's cabin window and the deck. Cat Lear went down the stairs and walked to Frank Lee and Sea Elf's side. After a few seconds of silence, Cat Lear asked, "Frank, what are your dreams?" Only then did Frank Lee realize that his captain had arrived. With a push of his palm, he flipped to his feet. "Dreams?" This biologist thought about it seriously and said, "I wish to be able to study the soil, the creation of objects, and crossbreeding techniques without restrictions, so as to ensure that humans will no longer be hungry anymore. Equality between people will be achieved. What you can do, I can do. What you can grow, I can also grow." Upon hearing this, artisan sea elf slowly got up and silently crouched to the side, opening his mouth and vomiting. Frank Lee continued without being affected. "In order to have such a world, one has to have sufficient food and resources, so I hope to create all kinds of creatures that can deal with different environments and conditions. Heh, everyone has their own tendencies. I prefer fish, beef, and spores. Catleya finished listening to Frank's description with a deadpan expression. However, during this process, she repeatedly nudged the thick glasses on her nose thrice. After a moment of silence, Catleya asked, "There's only one step left to your research now?" "That's right. I'm just short of a DMID's ability for catalyzing it. If I can't get the formula, help me make the druid beyond a characteristic I have into a mystical item," Frank answered frankly. "No, I won't help you. You devil." The silently vomiting artisan sea elf raised his head and shouted anxiously. Catleya watched this scene quietly. With a flip of her hand, she produced a gold coin. Ding! The gold coin flipped up before landing in Catleya's palm, heads facing up. "I have the druid potion formula. It's from German Sparrow, £5,000, Catleya explained in detail, as though she was deliberately telling artisan sea elf, informing him who the true murderer was. A look of pure joy immediately appeared in Frank Lee's eyes. He really is a swell guy. "Ah, Captain, I've only saved up to £3,000. Can you lend me £2,000? Most of his previous savings had been used to buy the druid beyond a characteristic, and he had even sold some of his items. Check out latest novels on novel/bin.com. Catleya fell silent once again. A few seconds later, she nodded while Frank Lee's expectant eyes were on her. "Okay. Northborough, Backland Medical University's affiliated hospital." Eudora lay on the bed with a blank expression, lacking the vibrancy a young girl should have. She had woken up from her coma some time ago, but she hadn't opened her eyes. Thus, she heard the doctor tell her parents that the injury she received to her right leg from the air raid likely couldn't be saved. They had to be prepared for an amputation procedure. After that, she lay down in a daze, feeling as though there were many people coming and going one after another. Among them, the person who had originally only visited the student next door, the Lund Charity Bursary Foundation director, Audrey, indicated that she was willing to pay for the subsequent treatments after hearing about her. The school's chancellor, Mr. Portland Moment, had promised to create the most advanced and most convenient robotic limb for her to walk like a normal person. However, none of this dispelled the gloominess, heaviness, sorrow, and despair in Eudora's heart. She wasn't even 18, and she had yet to enjoy the beauty of life, but now, she was about to lose a leg and lose her dreams. Her family wasn't considered wealthy. Her father was the owner of a grocery store that believed in the Lord of Storms. He was violent, barbaric, and unwilling to reason with women. Her mother was timid and weak, and she relied on her father to survive. If not for the fact that her family didn't have a second child at home, Eudora wouldn't have been able to study at all. But even so, her father had chosen a place like the Backland Technical School where results could be quickly seen. Previously, she had commented on how lucky she was that the Backland Technical School had been turned into the Backland University of Technology. Furthermore, she had passed the examinations and become a real university student. This made her smile every day as she passed the joy to the people around her while having the time to indulge in her hobby for poetry. Eudora's dream was to remain in the university and be a university teacher, finding a husband who loved her as she loved him. At the same time, she could constantly keep true to her pursuit of poetry, hoping that they would one day be published in magazines and newspapers. Now, all of this had been destroyed by a bomb that fell from the sky. It had been mercilessly and cruelly destroyed. After an unknown period of time, Eudora silently pulled up the blanket and covered her face. She let out a soft whimper that sounded like a baby beast. The crying didn't stop for a while. After a while, Eudora suddenly lifted the blanket and saw a black figure standing by her bed. Half of the black figure's face was covered by mushrooms, while the other half was covered in weeds. In the black figure's hand was a wooden cane. Eudora couldn't even scream. She felt like her heart was about to burst out of her chest. The black figure touched her with the tip of a cane. Eudora felt her heart return to normal while her right leg felt cold, as though she could feel her leg again. When she looked at the bedside again, the black figure wasn't there anymore. In her daze, Eudora moved her right leg and realized that it wasn't painful at all. It was as if she had never been hurt before. She pulled up the blanket again and covered her face. A few seconds later, there was a sound of disbelief under the blanket. It was filled with fear, but it was also mixed with crying that were tears of joy. Lord of the Mysteries Chapter 1090. Nighttime, Pritz Harbor, in a cemetery in the suburbs. The people who died in the airship bombings had been brought here. The priests and bishops of the 3 churches were busy comforting the souls of the dead to prevent any anomalies from happening. In that short day, many wives lost their husbands, many children lost their mothers, and many families were down to a single person. Some of them loitered in the cemetery, some silent, others sobbing. Some even wept until they fainted. Wearing an ordinary-looking face, Klein stood among them and watched everything without saying a word. It was as if he had recalled the funeral he had attended before. While it was dark, he had just used life's cane to treat the injured in Backland and Pritz Harbor's various hospitals victims of the air raid. He had also left behind a strange and horrifying urban myth to help him further digest the bizarro sorcerer potion. And he knew that, once such haunted tales spread like wildfire, Zaratul, who was in Backland, would immediately be able to understand what was going on. He would send his marionettes to monitor the corresponding areas. Hence, before the news spread, he relied on teleporting to travel to all the hospitals in Backland and Pritz Harbor, leaving behind all sorts of horror stories to treat patients with severe illnesses. When this matter spread, he believed that he would receive a great deal of feedback, allowing him to take a firm and huge step in the direction of completely digesting the potion. However, Klein didn't stop there. The existence of a conspiracy created by the Red Angel evil spirit, and the fact that Zaratul was in Backland, was like a guillotine hanging above his head, urging him to continue searching for opportunities. Hence, he came here to witness the grief of the ordinary citizens. After a moment of silence, Klein retracted his gaze and turned to leave the cemetery. After arriving at an empty spot, his left glove quickly turned dark blue, and slippery fish scales grew out. With a whoosh, the wind swept over, and Klein flew up into the air towards the harbor. In the sea beyond the land, the Sonya Sea fleet from the Fasak Empire was quietly waiting. It was as if they were prepared to launch another bombardment after daybreak, destroying the rest of the shipyards. Soon, Klein arrived above the harbor ruins and looked at the faint flames in the dark night. At the same time, his 2 marionettes had used flaming jump to rush over from the ground, splitting up into different hidden locations. From what he had heard and seen, Klein didn't have any doubts or feelings towards what he was about to do. However, he was still confused. Taking revenge on the invaders was a legitimate matter, but if he were to seriously injure the Fasak fleet, the happiest person would be the Lun King, George I, true mastermind behind all of this, one of the culprits who had pushed for war. There are too many principles in this world, but only those who have truly experienced it will realize that there are times when doing nothing is the correct path. It will fill one's heart with conflict. With a sigh, Klein turned his attention to the information he had received from the Hanged Man. The commander of the Sonya Sea fleet from the Fasak Empire was Admiral Igor Einhorn. He was a demigod from the royal family, currently a sequence for Iron-Blooded Knight of the Red Priest pathway. Through this information, together with the contents of the Red Priest card, more key points surfaced in Klein's mind. Iron-Blooded Knight can make women turn into men, and also make them have courage that is comparable to steel. Not only can they control multiple types of flames, but they're also masters in this domain. They can even turn their own flames into steel. On the Nepos, the flagship of the Fasak Empire's Sonya Sea fleet. A burly man with a thick beard more than 2 meters tall, Igor Einhorn, was sitting behind a desk. As he drank Sonya blood wine, he pondered over what to do next. After daybreak, Lun's airship crew will definitely attack. Their Pritz ironclad warship and the corresponding fleet will return soon. If they continue staying here, I'll be left in a passive situation. Although I'm an iron-blooded knight, allowing the entire fleet's power to gather onto me while distributing the damage, the commanding officer of the ironclad warship is most likely a demigod of the Arbiter pathway, or they have the corresponding Grade 1 sealed artifact, so it won't be easy to deal with them. If I'm not careful, they might be able to make use of the advantage of their fleet speed and armaments. Retreating is the best option. After that, we'll continue attacking the coastal ports while the Lun Navy is damaged. This war is indeed a good opportunity to digest potions. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to become a war bishop before this. Otherwise, I might have a chance to advance to the level of an angel after the war. Sigh, only a war bishop can truly unleash the strength of an army. It's not like how I am right now, only able to focus power on myself. In the midst of Igor Einham's thoughts, he planned on using the hidden connection between an iron-blooded knight and the soldiers that were under his command to inform his adjutant to pay him a visit, so that he could give the orders of performing a retreat overnight. Suddenly, he looked up at the door. Thump! There was a knock on the door, and it instantly reverberated in the quiet room. An advance warning before an attack. This thought flashed across Igor's mind and he became extremely tense. In a battle between demigods, setting up an environment, sudden attacks, and catching enemies by surprise was a good way to seize the initiative. It was a combination that could effectively defeat or even kill an enemy of the same level. On the contrary, it was very difficult to accomplish it successfully. Therefore, giving an advance notice before an attack was either a warning without any follow-ups, or it meant that the attacker's level and strength far exceeded the target. As a senior iron-blooded knight, Igor instinctively considered the worst situation. He immediately woke up every sailor and soldier on the Nepos to establish a connection with him. At that moment, the noise sounded again. Boom! This time, the knocking sound on the door was comparable to the loud boom of a salvo. It made Igor feel like a bomb had exploded in his ears. Under his high-strung nerves, he carefully listened to the commotion. This wasn't much different from the roar of a cataclysmic interrupter. In an instant, Igor's ears buzzed and he felt dizzy. He quickly spread out the damage and let every member of the Nepos hear a faint buzz. Then, Igor grabbed the fountain pen on the table and threw it at the door. This dark red fountain pen left after images along the way, like a cannonball that had been fired. To an iron-blooded knight, no matter how ordinary it was, it could become a terrifying murderous weapon through his augmentation. Boom! The door that was hit by the fountain pen cracked open, revealing the person in the corridor who had knocked on the door. It was a man in a black trench coat. His body was as thin as paper, and his face had no facial features. At that moment, the fountain pen had already exploded. The tiny fragments were like storms brought about by the sweeping of a machine gun. It embroiled the person who knocked on the door, tearing him into pieces of flesh and blood. Igor didn't relax. Instead, he stood up and looked around warily. He clearly knew that the person who had knocked on the door hadn't appeared. At this moment, the adjutant, whose bunk was diagonally across from him, opened the door and ran out. When he saw the flesh and blood on the ground, he said in surprise, "Admiral, what happened?" "There's an intruder." Before Igor could finish his sentence, his gaze suddenly froze on the adjutant. The adjutant retracted his gaze from the flesh and blood on the ground and slowly raised his head. There were no eyebrows, eyes, nose, or mouth on his face. It was the same as the person who had knocked just now, a featureless surface. Igor's heart palpitated, and his entire body ignited, transforming into flames that shot out in all directions. After the scarlet flames dispersed, they swept forward and surrounded the adjutant. The fire quickly spread, revealing the already charred adjutant. When the cold wind blew past, the adjutant collapsed into a pile of ashes. The flames didn't stop as they flew out of the room, one after another, forming a tall and burly Igor in midair. At that moment, he saw seagulls flying around him. All of them had a human head without any facial features, their heads bare. Igor let out a secret grunt as a blazing flame surrounded him before he sent towards the strange seagulls at high speeds. At that moment, he heard the sound of metal rubbing against each other and immediately looked over with the help of the soldiers. When he saw this, his body suddenly turned cold. He couldn't help but feel a sense of horror. On one of the ships on the other sail-powered battleship of the Sonia Sea Fleet, the cannons seemed to come alive and had a life of their own. They turned around and aimed into the air. As for the cannonballs, they actively leaped into the cannons. Boom! 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 The moment these shells were fired, they were struck by fireballs that followed different trajectories, exploding prematurely mid-flight. Seizing this opportunity, Igor quickly recited the honorific name of the highest commander in the Sonia C. Theatera, weather warlock from the royal family. The ruler of the fog of the battlefield, the symbol of weather flux, the totem of the storm and lightning, the great Awatoma Einhorn. Find updated novels on no/v/elbin.co/m. This was also the reason why it was difficult to kill a demigod of the same level when an advance warning was given. They could always find an opportunity to seek help. Of course, the main goal of the attacker, Klein, was to create a bizarre scene to scare a demigod and help him digest his potion. He had no intention of completing the hunt. Upon seeing this, he hid beneath the water. Having achieved his goal, he immediately got Konas and Inuni to swap locations over to him and teleport away with them. As for Igor, he didn't let his guard down. He remained extremely tense and guarded against any possible attacks. Only when the angel responded did he truly heave a sigh of relief. Following that, Igor didn't let the fleet stay any longer. He abandoned the sail-powered battleship that had turned into an urban myth, and he left those waters. After a while, a seagull flew over and landed on the sail-powered battleship that had regained its silence. The seagull had obvious dark eye circles. It looked around and said in a language of humans, "I can smell the aura of a seer demigod." Lord of the Mysteries Chapter 1091. Backland, East Borough, in a cramped rental apartment. Wearing a rather thick jacket, Klein stood behind a desk and looked at the glass window in front of him. He carefully sensed the speed at which the Bizarro Sorcerer potion was being digested. It's really fast. It's even more than the first 3 months of my digestion combined. However, there's nothing I can do about it. Before I received Life's Cane, I couldn't provide sufficient treatment. I have to make sure that the heart of the target can withstand the fright they experience, so as a result, I wasn't able to go to the hospital to create an urban. Similarly, if it wasn't for the fact that a war broke out, it would be rather difficult to find other demigods. Those whose whereabouts that I can confirm are mostly on their own home ground. To secretly invade and create a bizarre sense of horror will involve turning innocents into marionettes. Even if there's no other choice, I wouldn't have considered it. Klein shifted his attention away from himself and sighed silently. He then repeated a word in his mind. War. At this moment, the street lamps in the distance were lit up. East Borough was pitch black with the occasional policeman patrolling the streets with lanterns. In the past, these policemen wouldn't have been so enthusiastic. Now that the war had broken out, they had to carry out the corresponding curfew orders to ensure that there was order and security. War. Klein repeated the word softly again, and in a daze, he saw a part of the ending. The Lund King, George III, has finally broken through the shackles. He's no longer worried that any of the 7 deities will strongly object to his apotheosis. He can officially push for the various rituals needed of Black Emperor. What follows will depend on himself, or should I say himself. As long as he can withstand the impact of the potion, and as long as he can maintain his rationality, he would be able to ascend to the divine throne and advance to Sequence 0. The Einhorn family of Fasak used this war that can embroil the entire world to allow its key members to significantly digest their potions, and without much difficulty, they can prepare the corresponding rituals and allow their family's overall strength to be enhanced. As for Amorn's brother, he can consume the potion during these tumultuous times and experience a transformation to become a visionary, allowing this world to have another true god. As Klein's thoughts drifted, a question suddenly popped up in his mind. Can I accept such an outcome? Can I accept such an outcome? Klein opened his mouth and slowly closed it. Everything he saw seemed to pass through the limitations of time and space before returning to another place. It was the extremely thick, slightly pungent, cold, and moist smog which was yellow and slightly iron-black in color which had permeated through the entirety of Backland. It was the tramps who were suffering from ailments, hunger, pain, and cold before being pushed to the brink of death. He was also struggling to survive. For the sake of food, he pushed himself with all his might, not daring to slack off at all. Finally, he saw the light of life. He bought his long-awaited ham, but in the hazy smog, he fell to the ground and never got up again. She was a hard-working widow. In order to survive, and to provide for her 2 children, she had abandoned all her dignity and made herself a shrew that spewed vulgarities. With pain-ridden joints that suffered repeatedly from the invasion of the humidity on a daily basis, she supported a roof that could block out the elements. However, the roof had collapsed in the great smog. The child she wanted to protect had died in her arms. It was a young girl who yearned to study and fantasized about a bright future. She doted on her mother and her younger sister, working hard in the room that was filled with moisture, always carrying that tiny bit of hope. However, after the great smog, she was no longer able to see the future she longed for. It was a girl who desperately took in knowledge under the care of her mother and elder sister. She had gone through too much suffering, and she walked out of her predicament one step at a time, hoping to improve herself. She hoped that her mother and sister wouldn't tire themselves out anymore and that she would have a chance to let her family of 3 to live an ideal life. However, all of this ultimately shattered. In that terrifying smog, this girl was left alone. No matter how much pain or joy she felt, she was no longer able to share it with her mother and sister. That fantasy of her family life never appeared, nor would it ever appear again. They were living beings that fell to the ground like straw, one family after another, one human after another. They would never be able to erase the pain in their bones. It was a student who clearly had a bright future, but only half of his body was left, his intestines splattered all over the ground. They were children who returned home from school, only to suddenly realize that they had lost their parents and had become orphans. It was the pain of writhing on the ground while crawling with great difficulty. He was an ordinary person who wanted to approach the future, but was powerless to swallow his last breath. It was the people in the cemetery who were so silent that it made one's heart ache, or those who cried until they fainted several times. It was a land stained with blood. It was the air filled with gunpowder. They were cold and ruthless shells. And for the mastermind behind all of this, the greatest murderer, he would step up to the divine throne over piles of corpses, only to receive cheers and escape his mortal coils. Can you accept such a development? Can you accept such an arrangement? Can you accept such an outcome? After a moment of silence, Klein suddenly spoke with a deep voice. No, I can't. This voice immediately echoed in the room. It was layered and interlinked. Follow news stories at no/ve/in.com. No, I don't accept it. There were still lingering echoes in his ears as the corners of his mouth curled up. Klein gave a self-deprecating laugh. The 7 deities already tacitly accepted it. What meaning is there even if you don't accept it? Once again, he fell silent. After a long while, he finally exhaled and said to himself with a calm expression, even if it's meaningless, something still ought to be done. In this world, how could there be many things that were guaranteed to succeed? That they were of value and be of use? The corners of Klein's mouth curled up. He looked away, turned around, and entered the room inside the rental flat. Although he had already made up his mind, he had no intention of doing it rashly. With his current level and status, no matter how hard he tried, it would be difficult for him to affect George Ill's matters. Other than throwing away his life, there wouldn't be any other outcome. Furthermore, if this resulted in chaos in the Lund Kingdom during a critical period of the war, resulting in the invasion of the Feysak army, then the deaths and injuries of the innocent would only be 10 times or even 100 times worse than the great smog of Backland. All I can do now is make preparations. On the one hand, I have to improve myself. On the other hand, I have to make more preparations and patiently wait for an opportunity. Klein muttered silently to himself. He found a black sticky blob and split it into 2 before smearing one half uniformly on a mirror. This was a way to contact Demonis Trissy. However, when all the black objects disappeared, there was still no abnormality in the mirror. There's no response. After being frightened by an angel like Miss Messenger, Trissy has already decided not to have any contact with German Sparrow. Klein sighed and walked to the bed to sit down. His thoughts quickly shifted to the reason why the Demoness sect had helped King George III. One of them is that the demonesses need a catastrophe to digest the potion and hold a ritual. The other is that George III has made a promise to them. He promised them that they could openly spread their religion? No, this should be something that the 7 deities wouldn't allow. Even if the Black Emperor is a sequence 0, and with the primordial Demoness and the true creator, they wouldn't be able to fight against the 7 deity alliance. Of course, after this war, the existence of an alliance between the 7 deities is itself a question. In that case, the 7 deities that know that George III is working with the Demoness sect shouldn't let him become the Black Emperor. The promise is for something else? The Demoness pathway has a true god, and there are very few valuable items left outside. Similar pathways? Isn't that the Red Priest pathway? George I know, Amorn's brother doesn't only know of the secret mausoleum needed by the Black Emperor from Blood Emperor Lister Tudor, but he also obtained the angel level beyond characteristics or grade 0 sealed artifacts of the Red Priest pathway. With the condition that having a sequence 0 means no sequence 1, this is probably the greatest hope for the upper echelons of the Demoness sect to advance further. Yes, the primordial Demoness should also be very interested. This can explain why the Demoness sect is providing help. The Red Angel evil spirit is searching for Saintess of White Katarina, and it doesn't seem to be as simple as he said. No, he didn't say anything else besides using common knowledge and reactions to guide me into thinking that way. Klein's train of thought gradually became clear. He decided to use Saintess of White Katarina as a breakthrough point, making her his next target. However, before that, he had to listen to what Queen Mystic had predicted. He wanted to know what she was planning to do in Backland from her mouth. Only by understanding the situation could he find and seize the opportunity. The next morning, the hermit Catlear conveyed the words of Queen Mystic Bernadette. Today between 12 to 12:30 p.m. at Srenzo Restaurant, Golden Theatre. It was the name of a private room. When Klein arrived at 11:55 a.m., he used an illusion to deceive the waiter, and he walked all the way to the room and waited patiently. After a while, he took out his golden pocket watch and opened it. With that, he put away his pocket watch and counted down to 10 silently. Then, he raised his hand and knocked on the door of the Golden Theatre. At that moment, his marionette, Konas, was sitting on a bench across the restaurant and reading the newspapers leisurely. Inuni was with a group of students, giving off a flyer that promoted the evilness of Faysac. Of course, the three of them would switch positions from time to time, making it impossible for anyone to make an accurate judgment. Come in. Bernadette's voice came from the room. Very impressive. I didn't notice anyone inside, nor did I notice anyone entering. Well, it's also because I didn't activate my spirit body thread's vision. Klein mumbled to himself before turning the doorknob and pushing the door open. The first thing he saw was large swaths of gold before noticing the chestnut-haired woman sitting at the head of the table. Lord of the Mysteries Chapter 1092. Bernadette was wearing an Inti-styled blouse and was sitting there quietly. Her chestnut-colored hair was naturally draped over her shoulders, and her straight brows were spread out perfectly. She actually had the aura of a female professional from Earth, one that had been in a high position for a long period of time. The Emperor's sense of aesthetics still has quite the influence over Queen Mystic. However, it's limited by the environment around her, and it cannot be fully manifested. Klein took off his hat and pressed it to his chest. He bowed slightly before casually pulling out a chair and sitting down. With a sweep of her blue eyes that resembled the deep blue sea, Bernadette's gentle and calm voice rang out. Why did you contact me so urgently this time? Aren't you a clairvoyant? Didn't you receive a hint of a revelation? Klein subconsciously replied in his mind before he felt that he was being too arrogant. This should be the after effects of interacting with the Red Angel evil spirit for too long. With his level, it would naturally affect the people around him. If he was willing, this effect would definitely turn into a form of corruption. Klein quickly did a self-analysis and made a judgment. He pondered for a moment before asking, "Have you attained what you wanted to achieve in Backland?" Bernadette slowly shook her head. "No. You can even say that I failed." "Oh?" Klein used a tone to express his surprise and puzzlement. Bernadette glanced at him and said unhurriedly, "There's a strange name for the Sequence 2 potion of the Mystery Prior pathway. It's called the Sage. To advance to this level, one has to prevent a disaster that involves a higher level of power. Sage. So that's where Sage of the Hidden Sage comes from." Klein was momentarily enlightened. Just as he was about to ask, he heard Queen Mystic continue, "I anticipated such an opportunity in Backland, so I came here a few years in advance to make preparations. I've recently been waiting for it for a long time. Unfortunately, I predicted that it would happen in the second half of this year. Last year, I wasn't in Backland at the end of the year, so I wasn't able to stop the Great Smog. And in this war, I tried my best to do something, and I achieved something. But to my surprise, Faysak directly attacked Backland with an air raid, and the disaster ultimately erupted. That's why you said you failed." Klein nodded indiscernibly and said with a sigh, "I didn't expect the ones to start the war to be the Phasacians either." As he spoke, he sighed inwardly. The difficulty of Queen Mystic's advancement ritual was controversial. It all depended on one's luck. One had to know that before he became a demigod, Klein had already stopped the true creator from descending. He had saved Tingen and Backland, which were feats that could definitely satisfy the ritual requirements of becoming a sage. But under normal circumstances, there weren't as many disasters like these, and they weren't things that could easily be stopped. Just like the present situation, Amorn's brother had planned for 1,000 to 2,000 years. Even if something went awry with King George III, war would erupt as he had expected. This was because the root cause of the uniqueness of the death pathway hadn't been resolved. This made him suspect that Mr. Azek's life in the northern continent had always been under the arrangement of Amorn's brother. If not, how did he, who had lost his memories, escape from the sites of the various major churches without a shape-shifting mask? More importantly, it was unknown why Azek had used his real name in this life. And this wasn't something that was suspected by anyone, nor did it incur any investigations. "Is this all part of your plan?" Amorn's brother. Upon thinking of this, Klein felt a certain trauma, a result of post-traumatic stress disorder. His body nearly trembled. He silently took a deep breath and looked at Queen Mystic and added, "This war involves the son of the Creator, King of Angels, and the true deities. It's not something you can stop." With Bernadette's knowledge and experience, she still had some changes to her facial expression when she heard the sentence. She repeated a few keywords in a low voice. The son of the Creator. King of Angels. Deities. She wasn't too surprised by this, as if she had already made a prediction. However, even if she was a clairvoyant, she wasn't able to pry into the script composed by Amorn's brother. After repeating it again, Bernadette fell silent for 2 to 3 seconds before sighing to herself, "So that's the reason." Klein adjusted his posture and thought. "Actually, to you, this war is also an opportunity. Next, there will be many disasters, including the clashing of powers at the angel level. I believe that you should at least be in control of a Grade 0 sealed artifact. You can stop certain matters from happening at the critical moment. Of course, you have to choose a good time and method." Bernadette nodded gently and agreed with what he said. She also tacitly acknowledged that she possessed at least one Grade 0 sealed artifact. Of course, as the daughter of the protagonist of the previous era, as the child Emperor Roselle doted on the most, it would be unbelievable if her father didn't leave her 1 or 2 Grade 0 sealed artifacts. What was more important was that Bernadette was already preparing the ritual needed to advance to Sage. This meant that she definitely had the corresponding Sequence 2 Beyonder characteristic in her hands. To a certain extent, it was equivalent to a Grade 0 sealed artifact. After tacitly agreeing, Queen Mystic Bernadette's gentle but emotionless voice changed slightly. "However, I still don't like war, even though it will give me a chance. I once hated him and couldn't understand him. That's why I didn't call him father for many years. It's because he did too many things against the trend of the times and hurt the innocent. I couldn't accept my heroic father turning into a crazy tyrant. And now, through the answers from the entity behind you and my own investigations, I somewhat understand his situation. I understand that he was suffering from despair, pain, and loneliness. I understand him as a drowning person only struggling on instinct. When Klein heard that, he sighed and felt his emotions in turmoil. In this world, the only people who understood Huang Da Roselle Gustave the most were probably the two people sitting here. Of course, this feeling didn't stop him from sensing that Queen Mystic Bernadette's condition was a little different today. In the past few times they had met, this king's daughter had never said so much, nor had she opened her heart so directly. At most, she would play the tune of music, subtly expressing her sadness. After some thought, Klein pretended not to notice, and he asked, "When did the heat start changing? Do you think there was any prior warning, or something worth paying attention to?" Queen Mystic Bernadette's deep blue eyes moved slightly, as though she had sunken into her trove of memories. After a while, she slowly said, "Not long ago, he proudly said to me, 'Haven't you always wanted to know what's surrounding our moon and other planets? In the future, our journey might be towards the Sea of Stars. Point 1. The Sea of Stars? What's on the moon and other planets?" As Klein pondered over Queen Mystic's words, he suddenly recalled a key phrase and something. The key word was cosmos. That matter was. Mr. Dorr had once told Emperor Roselle that once he had the ability, he could take a look at the moon. That would resolve many of his doubts. The Emperor finally went? That hysterical diary page, Adele, was written after this exploration attempt? He had unknowingly changed his personality, becoming extreme? Klein recalled the corresponding content. Under Queen Mystic Bernadette's gaze, he deliberated and said, "At your level, you should more or less know that there's corruption coming from the cosmos." Bernadette nodded and didn't pursue the matter. It was as though she knew that German Sparrow wasn't sure either. She knew that only an angel-level demigod could detect and resist the corruption. After more than 10 seconds of silence, the topic was directed towards Klein's reason for being here. One of the reasons for this war is because the Lun King, George III, discovered the 9 secret mausoleums left behind by the Blood Emperor, doing so with the intention of switching to the Black Emperor pathway and becoming a Sequence 0. As such, he abolished the Grain Act. Klein didn't care if Queen Mystic knew anything about these matters. He followed his own pace and roughly told her everything without missing out any key matters. Finally, he said, the Black Emperor does have the ability to revive, but once a new Black Emperor appears, the original entity would perish completely. The original entity here referred to Emperor Roselle, who might have succeeded before being assassinated. Sometimes, Klein even suspected that Roselle had intentionally given others a chance, which resulted in him perishing on the spot. This way, when he revived from the astral world and regained his uniqueness and absorbed the 3 Sequence 1 characteristics, he would no longer absorb the characteristics of Knowledge Emperor, Arcane Scholar, and the characteristics of another pathway. He could make himself pure, thus, free from madness. This was a way to live through death, but the prerequisite was that Roselle's ritual had succeeded. He had died during or after the ritual, and not before the ritual. Queen Mystic Bernadette took it all in before slowly saying, "You want to stop George III?" "Yes." Klein nodded frankly. "Why?" Bernadette pressed in an unperturbed tone. The corners of Klein's mouth curled up as he smiled. "Some ridiculous reasons that aren't worth mentioning. Read new chapters on no/v/e/elbinin.com. Bernadette's gaze landed on his face for a moment before she said, "That's enough. I'm also doing such things for something that has slim chances, one that's almost impossible to happen. We can cooperate on stopping George III. We're all ridiculous people." Klein sighed and said, "I'll give you the method to summon my messenger." "All right." Bernadette reached out her right hand and lightly tapped the table. The fountain pen that was originally placed diagonally in front of her suddenly jumped up, as if it was held by an invisible elf before writing fluidly on the paper. "This is the method needed for summoning my messenger," said Bernadette calmly. 1. Author's note, from chapter 7:15. Lord of the Mysteries Chapter 1093. Queen Mystic's powers are all very fantastical, no, fairy tale-like. Klein glanced at the fountain pen that was writing on its own. He took out a pen and paper from his pocket and wrote the incantation to summon his messenger. He also indicated that each letter delivery needed the payment of a gold coin. Right on the heels of that, he handed the piece of paper to Bernadette and took the other party's piece of paper. He quickly scanned through it. An invisible creature that roams the upper realms, a strange spiritual body that is friendly to humans, a messenger that belongs solely to Bernadette Gustave. There's a certain difference between this and a standard incantation, but it's essentially the same. Queen Mystic must have deliberately changed it to this to prevent others from trying out the summoning incantation and using the connection between the messenger and the contractor to lock onto her. For me, it doesn't matter. My messenger is an angel. Only she can threaten others, and no one can threaten her. Even if she were to meet Zaratul, she should have the ability to protect herself and escape. Klein mumbled inwardly and shook the piece of paper, igniting a scarlet-red flame. As she looked at the piece of paper turning into dark ashes amidst the flames, Queen Mystic Bernadette said without emotion, "What are your thoughts regarding the preventing of George Ill's matter?" Having already made some considerations, Klein deliberately spoke slowly. "First, don't be rash. Don't take risks that we can't bear. Don't hurt the innocent." If not for the fact that Queen Mystic Bernadette had mentioned earlier that she hated wars and hated harming the innocent, Klein wouldn't have said so directly to prevent exposing his weaknesses. He would have used a milder and more roundabout method to achieve his goal. Upon hearing this, Bernadette nodded slightly in acknowledgement. Then, there are only 3 possibilities. One is to destroy the ritual at the critical moment and let George Ill's advancement fail. The second is to attempt an assassination in advance so that he won't be able to hold the ritual. Klein deliberately didn't give his third idea as he first analyzed the viability of the first 2 possibilities. Assassination has an extremely slim chance of success. George III, or should I say, the one who will become Black Emperor, should be a sequence one, so it's not someone we can deal with. Even if he one has yet to advance to sequence 1, he will definitely have acted ahead of time. Once he completes the preparations for the ritual and consumes the potion, he will be able to quickly digest it and build a foundation for the future. Of course, even if this situation has a very slim chance of happening, that person must be at least at the sequence 2 level. Furthermore, the Augustus family definitely has no lack of grade 0 sealed artifacts. Together with the protection bestowed to him, it's impossible for us to succeed. Here, he changed the way he addressed George III from Sihima to him. After calmly listening to everything, Bernadette seemed to do an assessment. As long as we can create a good opportunity, a sequence 2 can also be assassinated, but at least one of us will die, or perhaps both of us. What she meant was that the grade 0 sealed artifact she wielded was sufficiently powerful, magical, and terrifying. However, if she wanted to fully utilize it, the price paid would be very high. In that case, there really is a chance. That's because I lied just now. If I really had to give it my all, I could still find Will or Septin, Palace Zoroast, and Miss Messenger to help me. I can let them use the yesterday once more charm to recover their normal states for a short period of time. The problem is that I don't know how much of a price needs to be paid, or what kind of effects it would have on the situation. I also need to consider if it would end up involving kings of angels like Ouroboros and Amorn. It would be great if Mr. Azik woke up. With for angels and Queen Mystic's grade 0 sealed artifact, as long as we create an opportunity, we can even place our sights on a sequence 1. Of course, the chances of failure are extremely high, since there's no way to sustain it for long. Klein's heart was stirred when he heard that, but he didn't discuss it further. It wasn't that he wasn't willing to be honest during the cooperation effort, nor was it that he didn't trust Queen Mystic. Instead, Will or Septin and Palace Zoroast were being pursued, so once their whereabouts were exposed, it was very likely that it would lead to their deaths. This was something that Klein absolutely didn't want to see happen. He vaguely said, "If assassination attempt is the only solution left, I can invite at least 2 angels to help." This was referring to Death Consul Azik Egus and Snake of Fate Will or Septin, who Bernadette already knew of. She could guess the latter through the drop of mythical creature's blood. Bernadette was extremely surprised. This is that entity's will? Without the consent of the fool, how could his blessed seek the help of an angel? He has tacitly agreed to it. Klein spoke the absolute truth. Queen Mystic's blue eyes turned darker. She didn't say another word and only nodded slowly. As for Klein, he brought the topic back on track. The destruction of the ritual might be relatively simple, but it has to be done at the most critical moment. Otherwise, it will only be delaying George Ill's apotheosis. He has already received the tacit consent of the deities, so he isn't concerned about that. Even if the mausoleum is destroyed, it wouldn't take long for him to rebuild it. And it being destroyed at the critical moment will cause him to fail at the advancement and lose control to become a monster. No deity would allow such a creature to roam the world freely. A deity's descent will definitely happen to kill it off. The problem is that, with a king of angels' reminder and help, George III won't take it lightly. He will definitely arrange for the most secure protective measures. The difficulty might only be lower than directly killing him. This requires us to gather intelligence as soon as possible and find an incisive angle to be used. And be it the first line of thought or the second line of thought, it's best that you advance to sequence 2 in advance and become a sage. Bernadette nodded slightly to show that she understood. She then said, "What about the third line of thought?" Klein was silent for a few seconds before saying, if the ritual was successful back then and the Emperor had already advanced to sequence 0, then he would still have a chance to revive. As long as we could find the arrangements left behind by the Emperor before George Ill's apotheosis and allow him to return, the plot of George III will fail. He didn't use the word him to refer to Roselle as Bernadette did, to avoid exposing his identity. Queen Mystic's eyes clearly flickered before they turned dark and reserved. She opened her mouth slightly and said, "I'll hand over selected diary entries to Catlear." Klein didn't discuss the matter deeply. Instead, he smiled and said, "Actually, there's still a fourth line of thought." Bernadette's eyebrows twitched as she expressed her doubts. "That's to do nothing. Let George III hold the ritual and attempt to become a god while we wait for them to fail." Klein gave a self-deprecating laugh. The higher the sequence is, the greater the chance of failure. This was actually the truth. Even if there was the script written by Amon's brother with the road to success completely paved, and even if George III had perfectly digested the previous potions, the odds of him successfully advancing to become a god didn't exceed 50%. Of course, what Klein said was just a self-deprecating remark. Queen Mystic didn't immediately respond. She looked seriously at German Sparrow for a few seconds before saying, "The feeling you give off to me now is different from the previous few meetings. I'm taking advice from my psychiatrist." Klein smiled, describing himself as a very serious mental patient. Without another word, Bernadette retracted her gaze and looked at the fountain pen lying on the table. "Then, let's gather the corresponding information and maintain communication through letters." At this point, she paused for a moment before speaking again. Her gaze remained unchanged. "Actually, I'm wondering if he might have already been resurrected. It's just that he's still finding his past self. I'm not sure what details the Black Emperor's resurrection entails. I wonder if he really chose to be the Black Emperor in the end." Follow the latest novels on no/velbin.com. Bernadette's voice gradually became ethereal and carried an indescribable feeling. As Klein listened, he suddenly understood what Queen Mystic was thinking or expecting. She suspected that the fool was the resurrected Roselle, suspecting that the Emperor had fooled everyone in the past. In fact, he had never thought of switching to the Black Emperor pathway. Instead, he had chosen another path. As such, he needed to find himself by seeking out his past diary pages and cards of blasphemy. "Unfortunately, I'm just Uncle Jew from next door." Klein originally wanted to say something cheeky, but his emotions gradually turned staid, making it difficult for him to force himself to relax. Without saying anything, he stood up, bowed, put on his hat, and left the room. After closing the door to the Golden Theatre room and taking 2 steps forward, he suddenly heard a tranquil and melodious tune. This melody was ethereal and carried with it a faint sense of melancholy. After pausing for a few seconds, Klein turned towards the hall and left with flaming jump. City of Silver, a team gathered at the city gate and was about to set off. This was the team that was headed for Afternoon Town to prepare the exploration of the giant King's Court. Derek Berg was standing in the middle and was the second shortest person. In his hand was a bronze cross with sharp spikes. To his sides were Joshua and Chaim. They were prepared to receive the unshadowed crucifix at any time to prevent Derek's Beyonder characteristic from being purged. This sealed artifact required 3 people to take turns to resist the negative effects. As he looked down at the creator's relic, he suddenly felt someone looking at him. He subconsciously looked up and saw that it was a member of the 6-member council, Shepherd Elder Lovia. The woman, who was shortest in the group, had long silver and slightly curled hair. She was looking at the ancient, mottled unshadowed crucifix with her pale grey eyes. Her gaze seemed to be blazing hot. Upon sensing Derek's gaze, this Shepherd Elder's lips twitched, revealing an indescribable smile. "This is the Lord's item." For some reason, Derek shivered. Then, he heard the chief, Colin Iliad, say, "Let's set off." Lord of the Mysteries Chapter 1094. In a small alley in the Backlund Bridge area, Zio once again met the MI9 staff responsible for contacting her. "This is your reward from exchanging your merit points. A total of £2,500. Heh, I helped you get another £500. The golden-masked man threw a bulging envelope at Zio. Zio caught it accurately and didn't count. She instinctively pressed down and sincerely said, "Thank you." The golden-masked man waved his hand and said, "There's no need to thank me. This is also a good thing for me. If you continue to harp on past matters without letting go, I'm very worried that I'll go to military court one day." "Are you still going to stay in Backlund?" "Yes, I'm already used to living in a big city. When the war stops, I'll bring my family here," Zio said, having already made up her mind. "Wait for the war to stop." The golden-masked man repeated Zio's words with a slightly odd tone. He smiled and said, "May the Lord bless us to live until the end of the war." Here, the Lord referred to the Lord of Storms. "I believe in the goddess," Zio replied seriously. "You understand what I mean." The golden-masked man waved his hand and said, "Are you still planning to take on missions from MI9? "I won't reject an opportunity to earn money." Zio scratched her slightly coarse hair and said half-truths. "Yes." The golden-masked man nodded and said, "The main thing to take note of during the war is to deal with spies from all over the world. If there's a suitable mission for you, I'll look for you." "All right," Zio replied without staying any longer. She cautiously and carefully retreated out of the dark alley. After watching her figure disappear, the golden-masked man looked at the shadow in the corner and said, "She was likely used by some particular faction. She was abandoned after she stopped investigating the matter." In the shadows in the corner, a deep voice sounded. "On the surface, it looks like that, but there's no need to pursue or worry about the truth. Even if she can figure out the truth and spread it, it will not affect His Majesty's matters. The Church of Evernite has already tacitly agreed. That's for the best." The golden-masked man silently exhaled. After returning to her residence at the edge of East Borough, Zio said to Force, who was sitting by the bed and reading the newspapers, "I received £2,500. Force put down the newspaper, her eyes moving slightly as she focused on making calculations. "That's enough." Zio had savings of more than £600, and with the £2,500, other than her necessary expenses, she had £3,100 to spend freely. And her purchase of the Judge Potion formula was £2,000, and the Beyonder characteristic was £3,500. In other words, she was still short of £2,400, something that Force could lend her. After borrowing this sum of money, Force savings would be reduced to £780. However, this didn't affect her at all. She had the subsequent potion formula and main ingredients, so she didn't have many expenditures for a long period of time into the future. Occasionally, she could even earn a little from renting out Leymano's travels. Yes. Zio nodded. I'll complete the transaction as soon as possible and strive to advance to sequence 6 as soon as possible. Seeing that her friend's matter was settled, Force turned to worry about herself. I don't know when my scribe potion will be completely digested. Now that the war has broken out, it will be much safer with the ability to travel. The crux of a scribe is definitely recording. When I become a judge, you'll have new Beyonder powers to repeatedly record. This should be able to speed up the digestion of the potion. Zio pulled a chair over and sat down. Force sighed. I suspect that, other than the recording of Beyonder powers, I need to record down the sights and customs of different places. Only then can it be matched with the subsequent traveler sequence. But with war having broken out now, it's fine if I go further inland, but it will be difficult and dangerous if I go somewhere else. Sigh, the price of bread is rising. The price of 1 pound of bread has risen by a farthing. It's even more expensive than before the Grain Act was abolished. Read latest novels at nuv/e/l/bin.com. Indeed. Zio thought seriously and agreed with Force's conclusion. The two fell silent. After about 10 seconds, Zio suddenly had an idea. Actually, there's a very simple solution. What? Force sat up slightly and asked. You can spend money to hire that person to take you traveling. Zio was very careful not to mention specific code names and actual names. You can be thrown somewhere unfamiliar each time for 3 to 4 days, or even a week. Then, you wouldn't take long to record all kinds of customs and traditions. Besides, you can rent some mystical items from him from Femto record Beyonder powers. This can both improve your strength and help your digestion. That's right. Force's eyes lit up when she heard that. Only then did she realize that her usage of the tarot gathering was very superficial. After the pleasant surprise, Force gradually frowned. This method meant that she had to frequently deal with the world German sparrow, and the thought of the crazy adventurer left her trembling. Indeed, there's nothing that doesn't require a price. To digest the potion, I can only take the risk. Finally, Force made up her mind to make the request next week at the tarot gathering. In an apartment several streets away from where Zio and Force stayed. After returning from the Srenzo restaurant, Klein was sitting in front of a table. He quickly flipped through today's newspaper and summarized the important information he had received. The Fasak Empire's Sonia Sea Fleet has retreated from Pritz Harbor, their whereabouts are unknown. The Ministry of Defense, Admiral Amirius, has indicated that he will strengthen the coastal defenses and allow the 3 ironclad warship fleet to not return too hastily, and will take detours to avoid being ambushed. Fasak's 2-headed giant army invaded the winter counties Amatha mountain range and suffered intense resistance. They failed to pass through the few strongholds. Fasak's subjugation fleet attacked Constant and other large-scale industrial cities along the Mid-Seashires eastern coast. There was a large-scale sea battle with the kingdom's Mid-Seashire fleet. Both sides suffered losses. East Balam's Fasak and the Lund colonial armies are fighting in multiple locations. The rest of the countries have yet to make their stance clear. In the corresponding capitals, the ambassadors are running around to contact each other to have emergency diplomatic meetings. The electrical transmission waves contain all kinds of important news and are intertwining with each other in the different cities of the northern and southern continents. We are still in the early stages of the war. Klein didn't believe that the diplomats were able to avert the war. He put down the newspaper and thought about how he could gather information regarding George Ill's Black Emperor ritual. According to normal logic, before Blood Emperor Lister went crazy, he did things in a reasonable manner. That is to say, he couldn't build all 9 mausoleums in the same hidden area. This would have been easy for others to wipe them out all at once, causing his resurrection to fail. Therefore, in the surrounding areas of Backland, in other parts of the kingdom, there should be 8 other mausoleums that are similar. They haven't been exposed yet, so they might not be as heavily guarded as Ruins number 1. This might give us an opportunity. Perhaps the Red Angel evil spirit might know something, but I can't contact him now. Ignoring the question of whether chanting his honorific name will be dangerous, just this act alone will expose my intention to prevent George III from becoming the Black Emperor. To a terrifying conspirer, there are too many points that can be exploited. Queen Mystic might have some channels and clues, but I can't just rely on her. At the moment, the Church doesn't know how many of the Blood Emperor's secret ruins there are, or where they are. Attacking a key figure beside the king, such as a demigod from the royal family who is deeply involved in this matter? They must be on their guard. Furthermore, the angel of the Augustus family and that ancient secret organization would most likely be watching everything, one in the open and one in the dark. In addition, as long as the royal family's demigod ends up in an accident, George III would definitely guess that someone is trying to stop him from becoming a god. Yes, Demoness of White Katerina will be easier to deal with than the demigods of the royal family. It would attract much less attention. Theoretically speaking, George III, who has been tacitly accepted by the few major churches, no longer needs to work with the Demoness sect. Not that there is a need for that. If not for some particular reason, the two sides would have been completely tied together in this matter. The first thing he needs to do now is to cut off ties with the Demoness sect. Of course, he would most likely not betray the Demoness sect directly. On the one hand, the demonesses are also adept at ploys, so they wouldn't be unwary. On the other hand, if they anger the upper echelons of the Demoness sect, George II's Black Emperor ritual might not be that safe. This is a secret organization with a true deity, grade 0 sealed artifacts, and angels. As long as George III is still rational, the correct method is to follow the agreement and give everything that needs to be given. Then, he will send the members of the Demoness sect away. During this process, he will use the help of angels from the mind domain or even a king of angels to erase the key memories of the demon sect participating in the matter. If that's the case, even if Demoness of White Katerina goes missing for some time, it wouldn't alert George III. He might not even know. And from the perspective of the Demoness sect, the matter has come to an end. The various churches have also tacitly agreed to it. They no longer need to hide like they did in the past and can move about freely. This gives me and Queen Mystic a chance. Yes, Vice Admiral Ailment will likely appear again. From her appearance and the attitude of Demoness of White from back then, it can be determined that she and Katerina are related by blood. With this in mind, Klein heaved a sigh of relief. He cast his gaze out the window and silently muttered, "I hope Anderson and Danitz can find that pirate admiral as soon as possible. I hope that the City of Miracles in Grozel's travels can effectively destroy the influence of the mind domain." And all he could do now was to wait patiently. Berserk Sea, the Ruz Island. Danitz said to Anderson in delight, "I just learned that the southwest region of this place isn't a normal sea route. There's an island with no resources, but is hidden enough." Lord of the Mysteries Chapter 1095. You suspect that Vice Admiral Ailment's fleet is hidden there? Anderson asked in thought when he heard Danitz's words. Danitz replied in excitement, "It's very likely. Didn't the Black Death vanish after steering towards the west and after leaving the Ruz Island?" Anderson curled his lips and chuckled. "If Vice Admiral Ailment's whereabouts were so easily discovered by you, why would she need to hide? How can islands that you can find out about be considered hidden enough?" "Hey! What do you mean by that?" Danitz felt like he had been mocked. Anderson shrugged. "I don't mean anything. I'm just using my brain to analyze it. That island should exist, but it either belongs to the type that many people here know about, or it's intel that someone deliberately released. If it's the former, Vice Admiral Ailment Trace's fleet definitely wouldn't be hiding there. If it's the latter, that would be interesting. Who would release this intel?" Danitz was still a little angry at first, but later, he began analyzing Anderson's line of thought. A trap set up by some pirates or adventurers. However, an island without any resources isn't enough to lure others into exploring it. Vice Admiral Ailment herself? To figure out who's investigating her whereabouts? Anderson smiled. "That's right. After my teachings, you've improved quite a bit. Otherwise, I suspect that even if you drink the Conspirer potion, you wouldn't be able to enhance your brain. You'll only mutate and turn your enemy stupid, bringing him down to a level at which you're familiar with, and then defeat him with experience. I didn't say that. It was Emperor Rozelle. After this period of searching, Anderson had already helped Danitz obtain one of the main ingredients of the Conspirer potion and nearly all the supplementary ingredients. He was just one step away from success. I suspect that you have such an ability. Danitz muttered softly in response. Anderson ignored him and continued, if Vice Admiral Ailment got someone to release the news herself, the secret island must be a trap. Perhaps there's nothing other than a mirror that monitors the ships and humans that approach the island. Or perhaps it might be an important gathering base of the Demonis sect that German Sparrow mentioned. Then what should we do next? Danitz subconsciously asked. Anderson chuckled when he heard that. You can't even figure out such a simple matter? Naturally, we'll seek out the person you heard this intel from. After finding the source of his information, we can trace it back, and we'll eventually find something. That's right. Danitz wanted to nod in agreement, but the words that reached his mouth turned into a hair. Nearing dawn, on the second floor of a casino. Bots, with his brown hair, yawned and walked into his room. Before he could use the moonlight outside the window to light the candle, he suddenly saw a bright white flame light up in front of him, momentarily blinding him. Follow new stories at no/ve/in.com. Bots' heart tightened as he pounced to the side and rolled. After rolling twice, he suddenly stopped his actions, as though he had been petrified. This was because there was a bone-chilling coldness and a slight pain around his neck. This made him have no doubt that if he proceeded any further, blood would definitely spray onto the roof. What do you want? At that moment, Boltz's vision had recovered. He saw a blond man with one hand in his pocket and a black short sword in the other. Beside him was a man wearing a black cloak that covered half of his face with a hood. Danitz didn't answer Boltz's question as he looked at Anderson in surprise. Why didn't you disguise yourself? If you disguise yourself, how can you let others know who to hate? Anderson replied with a nonchalant look. Danitz exhaled. Thankfully, I haven't been infected by this crappy habit of yours. It's fine, Anderson said with a smile. Any random person on the island can know who I've been hanging out with. Dogsht! Danitz cursed. Bots, who had Anderson's sword at his neck, didn't dare to move. All he could do was listen quietly. He felt as though he had returned to Trier and was watching a comical scene. What are the two of them here for? The intelligence peddler was deeply puzzled. At that moment, Anderson retracted his gaze and looked down at Bortz. Who told you about the secret island to the southwest that deviates from the main sea route? Bot suddenly came to a realization as he looked at Danitz. It's you. In the past few days, this information had only been sold to one person. I was recognized so quickly? Danitz was momentarily at a loss as to how to respond. Anderson slightly lowered the pitch-black short sword in his hand, making the stabbing pain even more obvious. Please respect the order of what is to come and follow. Boltz immediately felt as though his life was rapidly slipping away. He hurriedly replied, it was Vice Admiral Ailment. When did she tell you? Why did she tell you? Anderson asked without any surprise. The night before the Black Death left the Roz Island, Boltz replied quickly, afraid that he would die from excessive blood loss. I didn't ask her why. Back then, I was only focused on admiring her beauty. She lives up to being the infamous ailment maiden of the 5 seas. Even after a long time, Boltz couldn't hide his admiration of her, even when he recalled her while being in extreme danger. Is this the charm of a demonis? Anderson muttered to himself before asking, do you have a way to contact her? No. Boltz quickly shook his head and said, she told me to take note of everyone who asked about her whereabouts. I'll tell her when she returns to the Roz Island. And if anyone leaves the port after obtaining the information on that secret island, they shall be left alone to leave freely. Is that so? Very reasonable. Anderson nodded and withdrew the short pitch-black sword. Is there a trap? I don't know either, Bolt replied frankly. Anderson didn't say a word as he searched for the money on Bolt's person and in the room. Then he pointed at the intelligence peddler with his short sword. I wanted to kill you, but no one will hate me if that's the case. Live well, curse me a few more times every day. He then turned around, walked to Dannett's side, and jumped down the window with him, disappearing into the dark, unlit night. Bolts touched his bleeding neck and stood up in fear. He ran to the window and confirmed that the two of them had disappeared. Thankfully, I met a guy with mental problems. If not, I would be dead today. He closed the window and locked the wooden door. After carefully inspecting the room, he finally sat down and gulped down half a bottle of Lanty-proof. In his tipsy state, Bolts collapsed onto the bed and fell asleep. Time ticked by slowly until it was 3 in the morning. Suddenly, Bolts flipped over and sat up. His eyes were bright and spirited, and he didn't even feel the slightest bit drunk. He found a dagger and pried open a wooden floor in the room. He took out a thumb-sized ball of paper. After the white paper unfolded layer by layer, there was a sticky black object in the middle. After taking a quarter of the blob, Bolts walked to the mirror in the room and was about to smear it. At this moment, he saw 2 figures reflected in the mirror. One of them was wearing a white shirt and a black vest with one of his hands in his pocket and the other carrying a short sword. The other wore a black cloak that didn't reveal his face. Just as Bolts's pupils dilated, Dannett punched the back of his head, causing him to faint. And his final memory was a voice with a smiling tone. He really didn't disappoint. After dealing with Bolts, Dannett bent down to pick up the sticky substance that had fallen to the ground. He chuckled and said, "This fellow actually believed you. He believed that you didn't kill him because you wanted him to hate you." The conversation he had with Anderson was actually a rehearsed play. It was to make it reasonable for Anderson to let Bolts go without being suspected. "This means that you acted sufficiently well," Anderson said with a smile. "It's truly different when you're acting as yourself." "Dogsht." Dannett cursed without any qualms. He then sighed. "I didn't expect him to be so patient. He waited past midnight before he took action. But we were more patient. If a hunter wants to capture his prey, he has to be patient. Sometimes, he can wait a few days," Anderson replied. To the two of them, there was actually nothing they could do. Be it a hunter and provoker, or pyromaniac and reaper, none of them were good at mediumship, much less having the ability to hypnotize others. In order to obtain information, other than interrogating and threatening others, they had to work hard on scheming. This is very reasonable, but in the future, it will be done with the words I use to school others. Dannett looked at the black sticky blob in his hand and said, "It seems like it should be applied on the surface of the mirror before contacting Vice Admiral Ailment. That should be the case. However, what's the point even if we contact her? Are we going to ask her out on a date to join us for breakfast at the Ross Island?" Anderson mocked. Dannett knew that he and Anderson were unable to influence the person in the mirror. All he instinctively wanted to do was to do something more, so as to better complete the task that German Sparrow assigned him. He frowned slightly and said, "Then what should we do next?" "Of course it's to contact German Sparrow. Let him handle the aftermath. This fellow is very mysterious in every aspect, so he should have a way to resolve it," Anderson said with a TSK. "Besides, the mission he gave us is to seek out Vice Admiral Ailment's whereabouts. And there are results already now." Dannett acknowledged and began taking out the candles and other items for the ritual. "What are you doing?" Anderson asked with an odd expression. Dannett set up the altar without looking back. "Summoning German Sparrow's messenger." Anderson fell silent for a few seconds before saying, "I'll go out for a smoke first." Lord of the Mysteries Chapter 1096. At just past 6 in the morning, the entirety of Backland remained dark. It was very quiet, with most areas being illuminated only by the street lamps. Wearing his pajamas, Klein sat on the bed and looked at Miss Messenger, who was carrying for heads. He rubbed his temples and asked helplessly, "Who sent the letter?" Why couldn't he have a good night's rest? The three heads in Rionette Tinker's hands replied one by one, that particular, brainless servant of yours, Danitz. He prayed in the middle of the night in the past, and now he's sending letters in the morning. Klein took a deep breath and slowly exhaled. Following that, he received the letter from Miss Messenger. When he opened it, his expression gradually turned solemn. This was because Danitz and Anderson's discovery of Vice Admiral Ailment Trace's location was extremely untimely. According to Klein's deductions, it wouldn't take long for the pirate admiral and demoness of White Katarina to regain their freedom. They wouldn't be hiding much, making it easier to find them. Now that they had dealt with the intelligence peddler, Bolts, and obtained the items to contact Tracy from him, the greatest possibility was that they had frightened the target and made her continue hiding. Of course, Klein could seek the help of Queen Mystic Bernadette to find a way to lock onto Vice Admiral Ailment through the mirror. However, the problem was that he suspected that the target's hiding place was an important stronghold of the Demoness sect. It might even be the headquarters where there were Grade 0 sealed artifacts. This way, even if he had confirmed the whereabouts of Tracy, he wouldn't dare to teleport over to capture her. Hence, any contact would alert the pirate admiral. And if he didn't take the opportunity to contact her, regardless of whether Bolts was dead or alive, the news would spread after daybreak. Similarly, Tracy would be on guard. Seriously. However, this is also because Anderson and Danitz don't know the truth. They don't know the changes in the situation of the Lun Kingdom. After some thought, he said to Miss Messenger, who was waiting by the side, "Wait for me. I'll write a reply." He had originally planned to teleport over directly to decide what to do next, but after some consideration, he still chose to write a letter. Although he believed that Zaratul wouldn't waste time on an obvious bait like Danitz, he still felt that he had to be more careful. If Zaratul didn't do so, it didn't mean that the members of the secret order under him would do the same. Such a huge secret organization definitely had a few demigods at the saint level. Once he got entangled by the other party, it would be a huge problem. All right. The head carried by Rionette Tinker that had failed to speak previously rushed to answer first. Klein got out of bed, walked out of the bedroom, and came to the room outside. He took out a pen and paper and wrote fluidly. Think of a way to make Bolts faint until dawn. Then, leave his room immediately and stay far away. There is a great danger lurking there. Monitor Bolts again when daybreak arrives, but don't alarm him. The so-called danger was a half-truth, and his main goal was to get Anderson and Danitz to leave the scene, so as to draw away any possible spying. Putting down the pen and looking through it again, he folded the letter and handed it to his messenger, Rionette Tinker, who had followed him out. At 3:10 a.m. in the Berserk Sea, the Roz Island, Bolts' room. Danitz had just finished clearing the altar and wiping away the traces when he saw the terrifying messenger with 4 heads return. German Sparrow actually didn't come. Danitz reached out to receive the letter in surprise, then he took out a gold coin for the messenger. After the figure with 4 heads and dark, complicated long dress disappeared into the void, he opened the letter and quickly read through it. There's danger. Danitz's pupils dilated as he rushed towards the door as if he had been burned in the ass. After leaving the room, he said to Anderson, who was standing in the corridor with his back against the wall with an unlit cigarette in his mouth, "Quick, let's go. It's very dangerous here." "Did German Sparrow say that?" Anderson was taken aback as he asked thoughtfully. "Yes, how do you know? Couldn't it be that I discovered something?" Danitz replied instinctively. "You? Heh." Anderson chuckled and asked rather relaxed, "What else did he say?" "Aren't you nervous? German Sparrow is very reliable on such matters." Danitz's focus was completely off. Anderson fell silent for a moment before saying, "His messenger is more reliable. At least, within the few minutes of his messenger's return trip, there won't be any danger here. If there really was any danger lurking here, they would silently shrink back when they saw the messenger." Danitz originally wanted to reply that it may seem so in terms of her image, but for some reason, he instinctively gave up on that sentence. Read latest novels at nuv/e/l/bin.com. He switched to saying, German Sparrow also said to let Bolts pass out until dawn so that we can monitor him again when the sun rises without exposing ourselves. Anderson frowned. What does he want to do? There won't be any latent dangers anymore once the sun rises? Without waiting for Danitz to respond, the strongest hunter of the fog sea turned around and entered the room. He took out a small metal bottle he carried with him and pulled out the stopper. He placed it at the tip of Boltz's nose and moved it back and forth. It's done. Let's go. Anderson didn't hide his curiosity as he surveyed the area before leading Danitz out of Boltz's room and walked far into the distance. Backlund, Empress Borough, inside the Hall family's luxurious mansion. At 7:25 a.m., Audrey suddenly woke up from her dream. She dreamed of the boundless grey fog and dreamed of the world German Sparrow asking her to help hypnotize someone, making the target forget everything that had happened in the past 6 hours, as well as all the people who asked about a particular secret island. This is something that can be used as contributions needed for the manipulator potion formula and beyond a characteristic. Also, Mr. World said that he would donate £7,000 for the war efforts. Audrey got off the bed very lightly and put a teal cloak over her white nightgown. Following that, she followed German Sparrow's instructions and set up a ritual, praying for Mr. Fool's bestowment. The illusory door quickly took shape and opened, sending 3 items flying out and landing on the altar. One of them was a thin human-skinned glove, the other was the instruction manual on a piece of paper, and the other was a neat stack of cash that wasn't tied up. This is creeping hunger? Audrey scrutinized the altar and thanked Mr. Fool. Then, she put on the glove and, according to the instruction manual, activated the spirit of the traveler. When the glove turned transparent, the 12 sacred angels with fiery wings suddenly appeared in front of her. This is the angel's embrace that Mr. World has requested? Its effect is to interfere with divination and prophecy powers at the scene, so as to ensure that my identity won't be exposed. Audrey's eyes darted around as she changed the lie accessory, which she had already prepared, into a silver mask, and she wore it on her face. Following that, she followed the coordinates given by the World German Sparrow and began the teleportation step. During this process, the strange scenery of the spirit world and all kinds of strange creatures left a deep impression on her. However, before she could carefully observe them, she arrived at her destination. She saw that the colors were saturated, and the stacked scenes rapidly faded away, becoming normal. It was still late at night outside. It feels like I've recovered my feelings and mood from when I first entered the mysterious world. Audrey analyzed her mental state and focused her attention on the target lying on the floor in the room she was in. It was an unconscious man. The door to his body of heart and mind was rather weak, meaning that he was someone who could easily be charmed, even if it didn't involve beyonder powers. Hypnotizing such a target wasn't difficult for Audrey. However, in order to digest the potion, she decided to use dreams to help with the hypnosis. The unconscious Boltz had a dream. He dreamed of a blurry female figure. In his dream, he believed that she was the most beautiful woman in the world, a perfect state that Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy could achieve. Boltz wildly chased her as he ran back and forth in the wilderness, hills, and mountains. However, he couldn't catch up to her, as though he had left behind something very important. After an unknown period of time, he woke up from exhaustion and slowly recalled what had happened last night. He was in a bad mood because of him losing money. He had fallen drunk after drinking only half a bottle of Lanti-Proof. Up to now, his temples were still throbbing in pain. I even knocked the back of my head. Boltz rubbed the swollen area and lumbered back to the bed. He fell into it and continued sleeping. And for Audrey, who had completed a milder form of hypnosis with the Dreamwalker's powers, she had long followed the World German Sparrow's instructions and restored the scene completely, leaving nothing suspicious behind. This was the ability of a senior spectator. Then, she teleported back to Backlund and sacrificed creeping hunger to Mr. Fool. The entire process didn't cause much of a stir. The Church of Evernite beyond us in charge of protecting the Hall family were completely unaware. After dealing with all kinds of traces, Audrey pulled a bell and let the maidservants waiting outside enter. Her personal maidservant, Annie, gestured for the other maidservants to get busy as she said to Audrey, "Miss, there's a piece of news from the Bursary Foundation." "What news?" Audrey interpreted the shock, confusion, disbelief, joy, and curiosity in Annie's tone. Annie replied quickly that Miss Eudora, who needed to have her leg amputated, has completely recovered. It's as though she was never injured. This is a medical miracle. Audrey was similarly stunned. She had some guesses, but she didn't dare to confirm them. She lacked sufficient clues and evidence. Also, all the patients with serious medical conditions have fully recovered. At this point, Annie couldn't control herself. She lowered her voice and said, "I heard that there was a ghost wandering around. Half of its face had mushrooms growing all over, and the other half was covered in weeds. It ate illnesses, trauma, and grief. I don't know if it's true, but it's scary." Mushroom. Weeds. Audrey repeated the two words, momentarily at a loss. Lord of the Mysteries Chapter 1097. Seeing that her mistress was clearly interested in ghost tales, Annie glanced at the other maids who were preparing hot water, combs, and other items. She continued, "The doctors and nurses wished to invite the church's bishop to host a mass, but the remaining patients strongly objected to it. They look forward to meeting that ghost. They all call it the clown angel. They say that its terrifying appearance resembles a specially dressed clown, but in actual fact, it's an angel who can resolve pain and torment. This title is very interesting," Audrey said with a faint smile. If it were in the past, she would definitely be very interested in this, perhaps eager to make a trip to the hospital via dream traversal to figure out what was going on with the so-called clown angel. However, the sudden eruption of the war made her feel rather depressed. She felt that there were too many important things that she needed to do, so she wasn't in the mood to probe further. In fact, if she hadn't experienced the air raid herself and seen those who were injured because of it, she would definitely feel like a war had never happened over the past few days and that Backland was still very peaceful. This was because, after that air raid, the airship fleet of the Lun Kingdom had been roped into the war effort. The air defenses of the coastal cities had all been raised, and Backland didn't suffer another attack again. Currently, the battle between Faysac and Lun was mainly focused in three places: the Winter County's Amatha mountain range, the heavy industry metropolitan area along the Mid-Seashire's east coast, and the few harbours along the Sonia Sea coast. Furthermore, they were in a deadlock with no side gaining an advantage over the other. Even if there were casualties, it didn't have any material impact on Backland. Other than the rise in prices, with several editorial pieces in the newspapers, this city seemed to restore its peace in a few short days. However, Audrey didn't think so. Her father and brother had been busy with work recently, often returning late at night or convening a private gathering with a group of nobles, members of parliament, and clergymen. Through the other charity organizations in the Church of Evernight, she learned of the exact number of casualties at the front lines of Pritz Harbour and Amatha. She even saw some photos of the battlefield. She was working hard to gather funds, contacting various pharmaceutical companies and hospitals, hoping that she could organize help and treatment needed in the war effort. Who would have thought that the crazy adventurer has not only offered the excess food in his manor, but he has even donated £7,000 in cash? Audrey sighed secretly and began letting the maidservant help doll her up. South of the bridge, Rose Street. Emlyn White casually donated £10 to a charity organisation solicitor. He pressed his top hat and walked up the stairs, entering the Harvest Church. At this moment, there were no believers in the cathedral. Father Utravsky, who looked like a half-giant, sat at the front and prayed sincerely. Emlyn was in no hurry to change into his priest robes. He sat beside the priest and wanted to say something, but when he opened his mouth, he ended up scoffing. "It must be your typical Faysac appearance and figure that made those believers fearful of coming over," Emlyn said casually as he looked at the altar in front of him. Bishop Utravsky put down his hands and opened his eyes. "I can understand them." "What's the point of understanding them? If the war gets more intense and the number of soldiers who die in the battle increase a bit more, the believers might rush in here and bomb the cathedral and hang you to death. Emlyn continued to look at the sacred emblem of life. Father Yutravsky shook his head slightly. No, they won't. They sincerely believe in the Earth Mother. They won't burn the cathedral. At most, they will banish me. If I express that I've given up on my FASAC nationality, there will always be people who will understand and accept me. Emlyn Tisked and said without moving his gaze, what if Fainapota joins in the war and attacks Desi Bay, Lun territory? What if the Church of Earth Mother calls all clergymen to arms and become enemies with Lun? Are you going to obey the orders of the Church and abandon the believers here, or are you going to pretend that you don't know anything? Continuing promoting how precious life is, how joyous the harvest is as you are now? Or will you directly organize those believers to make them become enemies with their own kind, using blood and sacrifices to prove their faith? Bishop Yutravsky slowly looked at the sacred emblems of life up and above the altar, not saying anything for a long time. Emlyn didn't bring up any more questions as he fell silent like the priest. The entire Harvest Church was silent. On a colonial island, Alger Wilson, who hadn't had the chance to return to Pazu Island, didn't leave the Blue Avenger due to his principles of being cautious. He only sent his sailors to take turns to gather information. Read latest novels at nuv/e/l/bin.com. Captain, there still isn't any news about mustering us, a sailor reported to Alger of his findings of the day while reeking of alcohol. Alger waved his hand and dismissed his subordinate to leave the room. Then he frowned slightly and muttered silently to himself, the Church doesn't seem to care much about this war. From what Alger knew, this was likely an intense war that would cover a huge scale. As the victim of an invasion, the Church of the Lord of Storms would definitely mobilize all its strength to defeat the enemy, including the captains who were scattered across the sea, by giving them corresponding missions. However, at this moment in time, Alger had yet to receive orders from Pazu Island. This didn't mean that the Church of the Lord of Storms was slacking off. The activity of the Church's forces amongst the Lun army and the air raid drills it was involved in the various major cities, and the activities of the demigods implied that the Church of the Lord of Storms was seriously resisting the invasion of the FASAC Empire. It was just that it wasn't going all out. Could it be that it's because we're still in the early stages of the war? The Church wishes to preserve a portion of its strength for the critical moment? Alger held back the stirrings in his heart and waited for further information. At night, another group of sailors returned with news that had nothing to do with the war. Captain, there seems to be some kind of monster hiding on this island. Many pirates say that they encountered a terrifying situation when they head out to pee after drinking too much. Some of them were violently slapped by the branches of trees, while others saw fruits growing on their bodies, ones filled with blood and flesh in them. Some of them encountered skinny ghostly figures with weak faces. A rather sober sailor described the rumors he had heard. Tales about ghosts and monsters. Alger didn't have the intention to probe into the truth of the matter. He nodded and sternly warned, don't go out at night. After such paranormal tales started in Backland and Pritz Harbor, Klein never went to those hospitals again, afraid that he would directly meet Zaratel's marionettes. With the creeping hunger and the ability to travel, he expanded his range for creating terrifying tales. Sometimes, he would be in the Sonia Sea, at other times in the Fog Sea. He would go to Lemberg, sometimes to Fainapota, and sometimes appear in places like East and West Balam, the Highlands and Valley. He didn't abide by any rules, and he relied solely on his momentary inspiration. He would visit some cities 2 or 3 times while not stepping foot into others even once. During this process, Klein felt an inexplicable strange feeling. In the terrifying darkness, invisible tentacles extended out, either searching for his whereabouts or attempting to predict his movement so as to intercept him ahead of time. They were silent and cold, and once they entangled him, the consequences were unimaginable. Klein knew that this might be the result of Zaratel's search. His best solution was to temporarily stop acting and to lay low in wait. However, it was also this subtle feeling that made him wish to digest the potion as soon as possible. Hence, he made use of the grey fog's powers. Every time he randomly chose a target location, he would go above the grey fog to divine the danger level and use paper angels to interfere. At this moment, with the huge progress in his digestion, he teleported to Kokawa, which was in the northern state of West Balam. This was where he had killed Ince Zangwill to avenge himself and the captain. The moment his figure appeared in the white feather square, he suddenly sensed something amiss. The residence that belonged to May Sanchez was too quiet. It was so quiet that it sent chills down his spine. May Sanchez was a native general who had previously bought arms from Dwayne Dantes. He was a beyonder of the death pathway, and he was backed by the Church of Knowledge. What happened? Klein frowned slightly as he considered whether he should enter to confirm the situation. After all, that was his collaboration partner. Furthermore, if he were to encounter an enemy that wasn't weak, it would be a very good opportunity for him to act. After doing a self-analysis of the situation, he believed that if he could use a Saint-level demigod as the main lead and create a few more horror tales, then his Bizarro Sorcerer potion would be digested for the most part. Of course, the prerequisite for everything is to be safe. I have to be careful and cautious. As he made his marionette, Kona's Kilga, transform into the appearance of Dwayne Dantes, he took out a gold coin. This time, the revelation he received was that there wasn't any danger. Strange. Klein didn't let his guard down as his body turned incorporeal before becoming a shadow that disappeared into the darkness of the night. As for his marionette, Kona's Kilga walked slowly towards May Sanchez's mansion with his face facing down. This was the ability to hide in the shadows that creeping hunger provided itself. As for the other marionette, Inunai, he was waiting about 1,000 meters away. As for the few rats that belonged to the marionette, they were spaced out nearly 1,000 meters away from each other, but they were unable to do anything. Soon, Dwayne Dantes arrived in front of the general's residence and activated his spirit body thread's vision. What entered his vision were black illusory threads that were grown in a messy fashion. They seemed to come from different people, but they also had an obviously similar aura. And normal spirit body threads didn't exist at all. After a few seconds of silence, Dwayne Dantes extended his right hand and pushed open the closed door. The scene inside was completely different from what he remembered. The pillars that were covered with golden foils, the golden sculptures on the walls, and gorgeous stairs were now rolled into a bunch like a huge porcupine with golden spikes growing out of it. On the ground, there were sharp stone pillars and shattered glass everywhere. Apart from these, there were more illusory bookshelves in the hall that didn't appear real. There were pools of black shadows hidden in different spots on the bookshelf as they curled and stretched like eyes from time to time. As the door opened, the pool of liquid-like shadows suddenly came alive and produced the same sound. It's you. My prediction was right. You're the one who can help me out of my conundrum. Lord of the Mysteries Chapter 1098. Upon hearing the words of the pools of black shadows, a figure suddenly appeared in Klein's mind. It was the elder in a white robe with inlaid brass lines. His hair was completely white and neatly combed. His pair of grey-green eyes left a deep impression on him. He claimed to be a member of the Church of Knowledge and that he was in charge of matters in West Balam and had a close relationship with May Sanchez. Back then, he had suddenly paid a visit to Dwayne Dantes, giving the excuse for his visit as him having predicted that he would be in a very troublesome situation in the future, and that someone he met during that time period would help him resolve the problem. After some thought, he slowly said, "Luca Brewster? Yes, it's me. You actually still remember me." In the different parts of the illusory bookshelves, the pool of liquid-like shadows rushed to answer. Their voices were no longer uniform. They were layered over each other, echoing endlessly. Even though he was separated by his marionette, Klein's ears still rang, and he felt a sense of dizziness. This isn't a normal sound. It contains a certain inclination towards losing control or experiencing mental corruption. The illusory bookshelves themselves are just for show. Just as this thought flashed through Klein's mind, he heard the black shadows curling and extending at the same time. Sorry, I was too agitated just now and couldn't control myself. Hiding in the shadows outside the mansion, Klein controlled his marionette, Kona's Kilga, and said, "What did you encounter? How did you end up like this?" The black figure sighed and said, "The adjudicator of the Fainapota military, Bella Costa, and the Church of Earth Mother's Archbishop, Martina, jointly attacked this place, with their main target being me. I had no choice but to activate my mythical creature form and make them temporarily retreat. Seeing as you entered without noticing anything, you must have teleported here. You're also a demigod. You should know that once you reveal your mythical creature form, it won't be easy for you to return to normal. I was also affected by inclinations towards going insane, and I nearly lost control. Fortunately, I was once a mysticism magister and had mastered many strange but effective mystic arts. Hence, I sealed myself to a certain extent at the critical moment and ended up like this. Sigh, this can only last for some time. The madness is still eating at me. I've already contacted the sea, and it wouldn't be long before a helper comes. However, I don't know if I can last that long. I was just thinking that this should be that very troublesome conundrum in the prophecy, and I was wondering if the person who could help me solve this problem would appear. I'm so happy that you're here. This proves that my prediction and interpretation wasn't wrong. This has improved my mental state. He really is a demigod who's determined to see his prediction succeed. If I were to turn around and leave at this moment, would you just break down and lose control on the spot? After lampooning silently in his heart, Klein began thinking about the key information that was revealed by Luca Brewster. The Fainapotter military and the Church of Earth Mother had begun taking action. He then got his marionette, Kona's Kilga, to take out a gold coin and flick it before reaching out to catch it. From what he knew, the clergymen of the 7 churches were focused on maintaining order and ensuring the safety of their believers, regardless of the situation. From this angle, it was impossible for Luca Brewster to be a devil or a demon. As for the impression that Vice Admiral Iceberg and Detective Isengard Stanton gave him, it made him feel that the Church of Knowledge wasn't too bad. He felt that, other than their habitual discrimination against people with low intelligence and those who were not fond of studying, there was nothing wrong with their actions and style. This is also the reason why they're unable to develop and expand. They can only stay in a few small countries. Klein didn't look at the result from flipping the gold coin. He mumbled a few words before saying, "How can I help you?" The excited black shadows fell silent. A few seconds later, they said, "I don't know either." Klein looked at them, and they looked back at him in silence. Instantly, there was a mutual silence. "Why don't I suggest turning you into my marionette?" Nearly 10 seconds later, Klein lampooned inwardly. His thoughts raced as he began to think of a way to resolve the Luca Brewster's problem of not being able to recover from his mythical creature form. To be honest, his seriousness towards helping Luca out wasn't just because of his good impression of the Church of Knowledge and Wisdom, but also because of interests that could benefit him. Firstly, there was the inkling of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom's existence in the matter of Grozel's travels. At present, he was unable to determine the true God's goal. He felt that showing some goodwill might lead to pleasant surprises. Secondly, if Rozel's return really happened, the attitude of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom was rather important. From the Red Angel evil spirit's tone and manner of speech, Klein could make a preliminary judgment. Compared to the 4th epoch, the 7 deities of the present era had a drastic change in attitude towards the appearance of a Black Emperor. Their reaction wasn't as intense as before, and they were more inclined to tacitly approve of it, even if the person wasn't their own candidate of choice. Read latest novels at nuv/e/l/bin.com. Under such circumstances, if Emperor Rozel were to return, the only ones who would be against it would probably be the eternal blazing sun and the god of steam and machinery. After all, back when Rozel perished, they had been involved in the matter to some extent. However, this objection wouldn't be too strong either. As long as Rozel's mental state was normal and he escaped the corruption and madness, there was a chance of being accepted. After all, the Black Emperor didn't have the problem of switching with the Sun and Savant pathway, so there weren't any direct conflicts of interest. As for the original grudge, it wasn't too serious at the level of a deity. Of course, this was just a guess Klein made from his knowledge of ancient history and from the angle of mysticism. According to his understanding of the situation, other than the god of craftsmanship, the other 6 deities had been enemies with each other back during Solomon's First Empire. They had left behind countless grudges, and had no choice but to rope in the Black Emperor back then to help them. In the end, they still put these matters behind them and formed an alliance that lasted to this day. Even the deities of neighboring pathways could coexist peacefully to a certain extent. As long as Roselle could really be revived, then as someone who wasn't completely dead, the feud between him and the eternal blazing sun and the god of steam and machinery could be resolved. Of course, with his understanding of Roselle, it was only a matter of time before Roselle took revenge. As long as he wasn't crazy and wasn't forced into a corner and wasn't extreme, he could still understand the situation clearly and know what to do and what it meant to wait for an opportunity. Under such circumstances, Klein believed that the ones who were able to suppress the eternal blazing sun and the god of steam and machinery when they expressed their objections and also make them tacitly agree to it were definitely the lord of storms and the god of knowledge and wisdom, because they and the eternal blazing sun were on beyond paths that could be interchanged. I'm just afraid that the corruption that stems from the cosmos isn't that easy to resolve. The revived Roselle may end up completely turning into an evil god, but such matters can only be done one step at a time. Only by understanding the situation can one grasp the crux of the matter and decide whether to press the button at the final moment. Humans can't stop because of worries with low odds. If that's the case, nothing can be done. Even drinking a mouthful of water might lead to the descent of an evil god. Similarly, what are the reactions of the various parties towards Roselle's return, and how intense would they be? This will require me to wait and make further observations before I can find the most acceptable solution for everyone. At the moment, causing damage during the ritual at the critical moment has the highest chance of success. As his thoughts raced, Klein looked at the pool of dark shadows and slowly said, "How long can you last?" Luca Brewster observed his condition and said, 7 minutes. I thought you were going to say 7, 6, 5, 4, 3. After lampooning, Klein said, "I'll get you a psychiatrist." As he spoke, he retreated a few hundred meters out of the shadows of Mesanchez's residence. Then, he set up a ritual and sacrificed creeping hunger above the grey fog. After doing all of this, he sat in the fool's chair, conjured German Sparrow's figure, and made him do a simple and quick prayer. At this moment, it was almost dawn. As for Audrey, who had been busy with charity work, she had yet to sleep. Treat a demigod who has shown signs of losing control. I can accumulate more merit points as well. Audrey put down the fountain pen in her hand and put on a white cloak with golden patterns. Just like the previous mission, she set up a ritual to receive creeping hunger and war lie, which was in the form of a silver mask. Under the protection of Angel's embrace, she teleported to the Mesanchez mansion in West Balam according to the map provided by German Sparrow. The difference this time was that, due to her facing a demigod, not only was she wearing a mask, she had also used lie to adjust her figure, aura, and appearance under the mask. Then, she saw Mr. World in the form of Dwayne Dantes. That demigod has broken down into pools of black liquid. Trying not to communicate with his body of heart and mind directly. This will infect you with his inclination to lose control. If you can't treat him, I can lend you a Beyonder characteristic. Klein specially warned Miss Justice. Audrey didn't say that she was very clear about this. She was very professional in this aspect and listened attentively. Let me give it a try first. She tugged at the cloak covering her body and took a few steps forward, casting her gaze at the illusory bookshelves and the pools of black liquid. Thankfully, he hasn't truly lost control. After examining for a few seconds, Audrey said gently. Accompanied by her calm and powerful words, an invisible wind of placate began to blow. The frequency at which the pools of black liquid curled up and stretched began to decrease as the sense of anxiety weakened. Audrey used placate a few more times. It was only when Luca Brewster's mental state was completely stabilized and he had the ability to cooperate did she get him to open up his mind and receive the treatment. And she took the opportunity to open the door to the demigod's body of heart and mind. She split her use of placate into multiple treatments during the process of purifying the corruption. She planted psychological cues, cueing Luca Brewster into believing that everything was fine, allowing him to easily converge his mythical creature form and turn back into a human. The reason for splitting up the process was because if Audrey was affected by the slightest bit of corruption and the negative effects, then she would immediately retreat and resolve her mental problems first. Finally, she completed the treatment and cues before taking a few steps back. "Your Excellency, you can remove your mythical creature form." The moment she finished speaking, the illusory bookshelves in the hall vanished. The pools of black liquid gathered together like life, taking on a human form. The black colors quickly faded away, turning back into Luca Brewster's original form. He sighed and said with a smile, "Thank you very much. When I saw a Sequence 5 spectator come over, I thought that I would become the main ingredient for her switching to another pathway." This old man's words are so direct. I don't even know how to respond to his words. Klein turned his head to look at Justice Audrey. He realized that her eyes were closed tightly. Klein opened his mouth to respond to Luca Brewster. "Don't worry. What you need the most right now is a set of clothes." Lord of the Mysteries Chapter 1099. Luca Brewster looked down at himself and hurriedly raised his right hand to grab something beside him. Then, his grayish-green eyes darkened. The gold that mixed with the stairs suddenly flew out and fused in midair, forming a thin piece of armor that then covered Luca Brewster. Luca stretched his arms and explained as he took in the feedback, Stiano's golden armor art. Its defensive capabilities are equivalent to that of a Sequence 5 Guardian. Explore up-to-date stories at no/vel/bin.com. "Stiano?" Klein asked casually. Luca said in a tone as though he was introducing a famous historical figure, one of the earliest founders of the Moses ascetic order. "I heard that Emperor Razel had previously modified this golden armor art. I wonder what effects it eventually produced. I can roughly imagine. Maybe this golden armor has 12 different styles, gel." After muttering inwardly for a while, Klein changed the topic to the main topic at hand. "Will Faina Potter and the Church of Earth Mother officially join the war?" When Luca introduced the Stiano's golden armor, Audrey opened her eyes and turned her head in a controlled manner. Without any perturbation in her eyes, she looked at the glimmering demigod. Luca sighed and said, regardless of what they were thinking previously, they'll officially join the war tonight. Of course, they wouldn't target Lund for the time being. There's a high chance that they will attack either Lemberg, Mason, or Seeger. It's to prevent an extended battlefront and from making too many enemies, which would prevent them from being able to concentrate their strength. Furthermore, the Church of Earth Mother might not be willing to exert too much strength. After sighing, this demigod from the Church of Knowledge earnestly said to the Silver-masked Audrey, "What kind of consultation fee should I pay you?" Audrey glanced at Mr. World beside her. "He has already paid." Luca Brewster immediately shifted his gaze to Dwayne Dantes. Klein thought for a moment before saying, "Let me ask a few questions." "Please speak." At that moment, Luca didn't look like a demigod at all. Instead, he looked more like a professor waiting to answer his students' questions in class. Of course, if he could take off that set of golden armor and change into a three-piece suit, the resemblance would be uncanny. Without thinking, Klein directly asked, "What do you know about the corruption from underground?" In his opinion, if the Church of Knowledge, which was famous for being knowledgeable, knew about it, then he was definitely at a strong enough level to bear the effects. And if this wasn't suitable for Miss Justice's ears, then he believed that Luca would bring it up. After all, he wasn't merely a bookworm. As the discussion about the underground corruption stemmed from their experiences from exploring the sea of collective subconscious in Grozel's travels, Audrey had a certain understanding of it. At that moment, it didn't feel as though she couldn't understand anything. She was very focused on waiting for the demigod to give an answer. Luca frowned slightly and said, "I don't know much about it." It's as though just knowing about it will result in corruption in of itself. I've seen a sentence before in an ancient book, the higher the sequence, the more dangerous it is to be closer underground. So the dragon of imagination Angwelt left an extremely deep trauma and some kind of fear down there? Audrey instantly thought of the object sealed in the bronze door of the City of Miracles, Live Zeed. She then looked at Mr. World beside her, but she didn't notice any changes in his expression. However, Klein made his marionette nod gently, so as to tell Miss Justice that the connections he made with were identical to hers. This made Audrey feel like she had returned to the past. Back then, she was still a low sequence beyonder of the spectator pathway. There was no way she could decipher any useful information from Mr. World's expression and actions. The higher the sequence, the greater the threat of underground objects. This doesn't make sense. Realizing that Luca was unable to provide more information, Klein thought for a moment and said, "Second question, what prophecy do you have regarding this war?" With the mention of a prophecy, Luca Brewster suddenly became spirited. It's only the beginning. It's far from reaching its peak. Also, a greater portion of the damage stems from the war and is also present beyond the war. I don't know what it is exactly though. The war has just begun. Audrey's heart sank uncontrollably. Stems from the war and is also present beyond the war? Is it the apotheosis ritual of Amon's brother, or is it the advancement of the Black Emperor? Or perhaps, the return of Roselle? With a guess, Klein nodded and raised the third question. Have you heard of the prophecy of the apocalypse? How do you interpret it? Luca Brewster's expression instantly turned serious. No, this is not a prophecy. Anyone with the ability to predict the future is certain that the apocalypse will definitely come. God mentioned in his Holy Bible that the apocalypse will happen in the year 1368 in the fifth epoch. Of course, God also said that there will be a savior. The prophecy of the God of knowledge and wisdom? 1368, there's only about 10 years left. Could the goddess's act of destroying the alliance with the god of combat to control the uniqueness of the death pathway have something to do with the impending apocalypse? Without realizing it, Klein's expression turned serious. However, he didn't show his reaction on the marionette's face. It will be the apocalypse in about 10 years. As for Audrey, she ruminated over the demigod's words in a daze. To be honest, she felt that it was fake. It was used by people who pretended to be mysticism experts and were religious cheats so as to deceive the people and earn money through that. Although she could foresee a large-scale war breaking out, she had never imagined that this world was very close to ending. This was the understanding of almost all ordinary people and beyond us. Why 1368? Klein couldn't help but ask. Luca Brewster shook his head. I don't know either. That's what God's prophecy says. At the thought that he was only a sequence for, making him not have the ability to resist the apocalypse, Klein rationally ended the topic. He said to the saint of the Church of Knowledge and Wisdom, that shall be all. What he really wanted to ask were things that the other party probably didn't know, either matters like the corruption that stemmed from the cosmos, or whether Roselle could return or not, or what his state was. Luca Brewster nodded and said, in the future, if there's anything you need help with, you can come to me. For the details, find them out through Edwina. He remembered that Dwayne Dantes' firearms transaction with May Sanchez had been facilitated by Edwina Edwards. Edwina. Vice Admiral Iceberg? Audrey was taken aback for a second before coming to a realization. She glanced at Mr. World curiously. She remembered that she had read a newspaper article before. It contained the story of German Sparrow and the 3 female pirate admirals. All right. Klein was never worried about having too many helpers. After he nodded at Justice Audrey, Luca Brewster's figure quickly turned transparent, as though he had fused with the spirit world. Then, he disappeared. Looking at the spot where he had been standing earlier and then at the hall that no longer had any gold. Klein let out a terse remark inwardly and fell silent for 2 seconds. He then made his marionette look at Justice Audrey. I thought it would be a little more troublesome. That saint had saved himself in time and was willing to trust me, allowing me to plant a psychological cue, Audrey replied with a faint smile, trying her best to appear sincere and humble. Dwayne Dantes nodded and said, this help will be taken into account. Go back as soon as possible. It's very dangerous here. Seeing that a demigod had nearly lost control, Audrey had no doubts about the danger Mr. World warned her about. She immediately used creeping hunger and teleported back to the northern continent through the spirit world. After she sacrificed the human-skinned glove to Mr. Fool and settled the rest of the matters, Earl Hall and his eldest son, Hibbert, returned home. Just as Audrey was about to head out to meet her father and chat with him, she heard her mother, Lady Caitlin, ask in the hall, did something happen again? You came back a lot later than scheduled today. Earl Hall sighed and said, Faina Potter has invaded Lenberg. Extra! Extra! Faina Potter invades Lenberg. Leonard, who was wearing a pair of red gloves, got off the carriage. Just as he was about to enter St. Samuel Cathedral, he saw the paperboy waving a newspaper and running quickly across the streets and square. He stopped the paperboy and took out a penny and bought a newspaper. As he flipped through it, he said in a low voice, perhaps it won't be long before the South becomes a battlefield. That's right. Pallas Zoroaster's slightly aged voice echoed in Leonard's mind. But why am I still staying in Backland? Leonard muttered in confusion. After advancing to Spirit Warlock, he had already become the captain of a Red Gloves team. The members had been transferred from other teams, including the familiar faces of Cindy and Bob. After the war broke out, Leonard had originally thought that his team would be transferred back to the Holy Cathedral like Soest's team, so as to participate in the battle at the Amatha mountain range. To his surprise, he was arranged to be used as a reserve force for the Backland diocese. As for this large city, due to its implementation of a nighttime curfew and other emergency policies, its security was good, and there weren't many Beyonders who came out to cause destruction. Even the devils who liked to murder didn't create chaos. It made Leonard rather free, making it more relaxed for him than during non-wartime duty. At that moment, Pallas Zoroaster smiled and said, I have a guess. What guess? Leonard hurriedly asked in a low voice. I'm not telling you now, Pallas replied leisurely. Leonard didn't say a word. He straightened his collar and entered St. Samuel Cathedral. He exchanged a few words with the Archbishop and prayed for 5 minutes. Then, he went underground and pushed open the door to his Red Gloves team's temporary office. Good morning, Captain. Bob, Cindy, and the other Red Gloves all stood up and bowed. Upon hearing their greetings, Leonard, who felt that he was already used to it, was once again in a daze. In the blink of an eye, it was Monday afternoon. Leonard arranged for his team members to go on separate missions, and he found a lounge to wait for the gathering to begin. 1. Reference to Saint Seiya, Knights of the Zodiac. Lord of the Mysteries Chapter 1100. Above the boundless grey fog, inside the ancient palace that resembled a god's residence. Dark red beams of light shot up from both sides of the long bronze table, materializing into blurry figures. Justice Audrey immediately stood up, lifted her skirt, and curtsied towards the seat of honor. Good afternoon, Mr. Fall. She wasn't in a bad mood, but with everything that had happened recently, she couldn't keep her spirits up like before. After all the members bowed and took their seats, Audrey swept her gaze and habitually began observing. Almost instantly, she discovered that Hermit's mental state and body language indicated that she was worried about something. It has something to do with Queen Mystic? Or could it be that there are other problems? Or could it be that both factors are involved in the matter? Audrey was slightly surprised, and she curiously considered the possible reasons for this. After so many tarot gatherings, she had long drawn a psychological portrait of Hermit. She believed that she was a rather contradictory Beyonder. She was experienced, knowledgeable, and calm. She was also bold and reckless in certain aspects, like a young girl who had yet to mature. Combined with the relationship between the other party and Queen Mystic, Audrey's interpretation of this analysis was that, although Hermit had experienced a lot, she had managed to resolve many problems successfully with Queen Mystic's protection and arrangements. Deep in her heart, she was still a young girl who yearned to be loved and cared for. And it was precisely within such a concealed state that Audrey boldly guessed that, when facing someone who had been abandoned and one who didn't commit any serious mistakes, she would unknowingly show mercy, pity them, and help them. At the same time, due to her being a woman who was active at sea, with the strength of Sequence 5 who also had quite a number of mystical items, experience, and knowledge, while wearing heavy glasses and having interactions with German Sparrow, Audrey believed that if she casually flipped through the wanted posters and newspapers related to pirates, she would be able to confirm Hermit's identity without a doubt. However, she deliberately didn't do this. She only had a general idea as to her identity. No, hermit should already be a sequence for demigod, so there shouldn't be too many things for her to be worried about. It's definitely not because of the war. It's impossible for a powerful pirate to be too troubled over it. As her thoughts raced, due to her lack of knowledge, Audrey had no clues apart from guessing that it was related to Queen Mystic. And at this moment, there were two matters echoing in Cat Lear's mind. Why did Her Majesty send so many diary pages over? If I hadn't become a mysticologist and grasped certain secret techniques, I wouldn't have been able to memorize all of them in such a short period of time. What exactly happened? Has the Queen fallen into some sort of dilemma? That fellow, Frank, actually didn't want to hold a ritual and wanted to directly consume the potion. Thankfully, I stopped him. However, the druid ritual isn't difficult for him at all. Being aware of the behavior and physical structure of various ordinary animals and 3 kinds of extraordinary creatures. As a crazy biologist, he has already done his homework in advance by trying to crossbreed plants and animals. Next week now, he will become a druid in the next 2 days. What he needs to do is write down all the knowledge and experience that he has built up as part of the ritual. Amidst her thoughts, Cat Lear shelved her concerns and turned to the end of the long bronze table. She lowered her head and respectfully said, "Honorable Mr. Fool, I have found an entire book of Roselle's diary this time." An entire book? Upon hearing Hermit's words, all the members, including the hanged man Alger, were clearly stunned. This was something that exceeded their understanding. In the past, submissions ranged from 1 to 3 pages at a time. This time, it was an entire book. Did something happen? Even though he was the least concerned about such matters, the slowest to react, the son Derek, had noticed something unusual. They all knew that Queen Mystic Bernadette was the eldest daughter of Emperor Roselle. It was normal for her to be able to provide an entire diary. However, it was abnormal for her to give an entire book. Cat Lear ignored everyone's gazes and continued, "These diary pages aren't connected, but they all originated from Emperor Roselle's later years." Very good. The fool Klein nodded slightly, indicating that the hermit could begin conjuring them. One page after another, the slightly yellow pages of the diary took shape, and soon, it was stacked into one book. After receiving it, he casually flipped through it. Without reading it, he put down the diary and looked at the hermit Cat Lear. "You can raise your questions now. Including the contributions you previously accumulated, you can ask a total often questions." He didn't read the diary carefully, because there were too many pages this time. There were at least 30 pages to read. It would require the members of the Tarot Club to wait for too long, affecting Mr. Fool's image, therefore, he planned to read it slowly after the gathering ended. 10. Cat Lear immediately felt a headache. This was because there were only 2 questions that Queen Mystic had asked her to raise. She deliberated for a moment before saying, "Honorable Mr. Fool, can we split the questions into multiple sessions?" "Sure." Klein nodded with a smile. This was convenient for what he had in mind. To answer 10 questions at once was also a very difficult task for Mr. Fool. Cat Lear secretly heaved a sigh of relief. There are 2 questions this time. First, why does one need to be careful of the spectator? Be careful of the spectator? Audrey wore a blank look. For a moment, she was unable to find any leads for coming up with a guess. She even examined herself. Be careful of the spectator? The Moon Emlyn, the Star Leonard, and the other members of the Tarot Club all cast their gazes at Miss Justice. The fool Klein chuckled and leisurely said, "A spectator always likes to hide in the shadows to secretly control certain matters, making it difficult for people to notice and be on their guard. In particular, one needs to be especially careful towards Angel of Imagination Adam. His apotheosis ritual is to consume the potion when the trend of the times follows what he envisioned. The trend of the times that follows what he envisioned. Allow the development of the times to meet his expectations?" Justice Audrey couldn't help but ask Mr. Fool. Klein nodded slightly and said, "That's right. A war that sweeps the entire world is exactly what Adam wants." Follow the latest novels on no/velbin.com. This. The Hanged Man Alger, the Hermit Cat Lear, and the other members of the Tarot Club were bombarded by the information divulged by Mr. Fool, and their minds were momentarily incapable of thought. Be it the apotheosis ritual or the trend of the times, all of them involved a very, very high level. It was so high that they could only look up at it. Suddenly, they vaguely understood the reason why the psychology alchemists were deeply involved in the royal family's conspiracy. And the members who knew of the Twilight Hermit Order further understood the essence of keeping the trend of the times on track. Only an existence at Mr. Fool's level can understand these secrets and participate in the corresponding game. Alger quickly found his train of thought and sighed inwardly. He was increasingly eager to become a demigod. He believed that this war would bring him plenty of opportunities, but he didn't know if he could seize them. The members of the Tarot Club were silent. As their thoughts ran through their heads, the Fool Klein let out an inexplicable sigh. This was because he had no way of stopping this war. If it was only the matter of making George Ill's Black Emperor ritual fail, he could jump through some hoops and stretch himself out to affect it slightly. However, in this war involving the trend of the times, even if he was an Angela Sequence 1 angel, there was no way he could affect the overall situation. Forcibly trying to stop it would only squish him under the rolling wheels of history. Apart from Adam, who has spent 1,000 to 2,000 years arranging for such a plot to play out, the rest of them, even the kings of angels, can only change certain situations, but not the overall trend. Only a true deity at Sequence 0 can truly participate in this game. It's no wonder the Emperor said that only by becoming a god can he protect those who he wants to protect. The only thing I can do now is to make preparations for the resistance in the Rorsted Archipelago. I hope they have the opportunity of being liberated from being colonies. Klein reined in his thoughts and made his gaze maintain a smiling look. He wasn't blindly opposed to everything about war. The education he had received in his previous life, and what he had seen at sea and in East and West Bayam, had made him have a supportive attitude towards overthrowing colonial rule. To put it simply, what he didn't like and abhorred was an unjust war. Sensing Mr. Fool's gaze, the hermit Catlear controlled her chaotic thoughts and said again, "Secondly, where is the secret mausoleum that Emperor Roselle has yet to discover?" Secret mausoleum? Yet to be discovered? Force became more focused as she felt that this was material for a best-selling novel that possessed all kinds of popular elements. On the other hand, Audrey and Alger could acutely sense something from this question. The eldest daughter of Roselle probably wasn't willing to accept her father's death, and was still searching for traces left behind by him, hoping to find clues to revive the Emperor. Of course, they couldn't eliminate the possibility that there were other important items in the secret mausoleum. That might be Queen Mystic's goal as well. Roselle even left behind a secret mausoleum? I wonder what's inside. The Star Leonard and Judgment Zio were more concerned about this. The Fool Klein was already prepared for this. He smiled and said, "Perhaps in the fog scene the secret primitive island Roselle discovered of the Abyss." Abyss? Emlyn immediately felt his eyelids twitch. In the history of the Sanguine, there were many records of Second Epoch devils wreaking havoc. Even when he read those materials after thousands of years since it happened, he still felt himself turn impetuous and become entangled by chaos. The son Derek had a similar feeling as him, but he didn't think too much about it. When reading certain documents, his mental state would be overexerted, and his mental state would unknowingly be affected. This was common knowledge known by everyone in the City of Silver, so he had to first receive general education and listen to a teacher's recount. Abyss? Audrey, Zio, and company subconsciously repeated that term in their hearts. In their daily lives, the abyss was an abstract expression. It was synonymous with danger, pain, decadence, and corruption. They never expected that it really existed somewhere in the fog sea.